to another consultation on electoral reform in the Commonwealth of Dominica. I would like to welcome this evening the Honorable Levi Peter, Attorney General, Permanent Secretaries who are here with us this evening, our observers who are joining us live this evening, Justice Masaga of the Commonwealth Secretariat, Ms. Glynn of the OAS, Mr. Dwight Lay of the OECS, and Mr. Gunraj of CARICOM, and all of our attendees who are joining us on the Zoom webinar and via social media and other media platforms. If you see me smiling a bit more this evening, it is because we are hosting our final consultation after 3 weeks of nightly sessions with you. And this evening we are hosting the second round of virtual consultations focusing on the diaspora and looking at the report presented to the Government of Dominica by Sir Dennis Byron after a comprehensive review of our electoral processes. Over the last 3 weeks, we have held consultations across the island on electoral reform, and more specifically, as you already know, on the recommendations from the Sir Dennis Byron report. We have consulted, as I have told you, every evening with various groups. We started with the legal fraternity and political parties and independent candidates. We also consulted with churches, various religious groups, members of the media, NGOs, and other groups and associations. And we were fortunate enough to move around the island and converse with various communities. At the community level, we have been to Portsmouth. We discussed with voters in the north. We also visited Castlebrose and hosted a consultation there for individuals living on the east coast of Dominica. We also went to Wesley at the Northeast Comprehensive School, where we hosted voters from the northeast. We came back to Roseau, and at Roseau, we were able to have very passionate discussions with individuals from the West Coast and the South. We also went back to the Northeast, to Marigot, and last evening, our final community consultation was at the Kalinago territory. All of these consultations have been very productive. We have heard the views of many Dominicans from a wide spectrum of society across the island. This evening, we understand the significance of the views of Dominicans overseas in the electoral process, and we are hosting a second round of consultations with the diaspora. The diaspora was initially hosted in our second week of consultations, but because of the number of requests and the number of individuals who showed interest, we decided to host another session this evening as our final session. As you already know, the report was conducted in 2 phases, and the AG will give a summary of each of the phases of the report, as he has done for the last few evenings. At this time, I would like to welcome Honorable Levi Peter with his presentation.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Our observers, Justice Raphael Masaga of the Commonwealth Secretariat, Ms. Mellin Glynn of the Organization of American States, Mr. Dwight Lay of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, and Mr. Saz Gunraj of CARICOM, and the permanent secretaries present, as well as other government officials, and of course those who are joining by live link and otherwise. Welcome and good evening to all. The chairperson has indicated that I will be going through the phases. I had intended to focus on a number of areas, but I am told that there are many who are anxious, chaffing at the bit to make their contribution, and I think the contributions of those who are listening are far more important than whatever I have to say. It seemed to me, so very briefly, I would say that insofar as in particular this particular consultation with the Diaspora. Judging from contributions that have been made so far, it seems to me that areas such as the Electoral Commission, its role in this exercise, as well as the recommendations that Sir Dennis has for it, is an important issue that will no doubt feature, as will, I suspect, identification cards, the issue of absence from Dominica, the right to vote and residency, confirmation or re-registration, access to the media, campaign financing. I don't intend to go into those in any great depth, because I think it may be preferable if I listen, and where there may be issues in terms of issues of law or otherwise in relation to fact that I think is necessary to clear up, then I will seek the chairperson's permission to intervene at an appropriate point. Just to say on the issue of confirmation, which is probably of importance and significance to those of you in diaspora. The confirmation as is proposed by Sir Dennis is not really very significantly different, if it's different at all. In fact, I see no difference from what was proposed by the government of Dominica in its legislation that it was seeking to take to Parliament in 2017 and 2018. Maybe the only difference is that he puts a certain time frame. But in essence, the confirmation period will mean, if it comes in, that anybody who is already registered and wishes to remain on the register will have to approach the electoral office by whatever means is decided and confirm their name on the register so as to remain registered and continue to be able to exercise the right to vote. The proposal of Sir Dennis is that not later than 30 days after the Registration of Electors Act that he proposes is enacted, the Electoral Commission would be required to declare a period which would be termed a confirmation period, during which the confirmation would take place. And that period is to be for no less than 6 months and no more than 9 months. One important feature that I haven't heard anybody raise, I don't think, in relation to the confirmation, is that if one of the suggestions that is being made in respect to the issue of absence from Dominica, those of you who have been listening, and I suspect that's probably most, if not all of you who are listening tonight, would know that there's been a great deal of discussion about the provision which provides that a person who has been absent from Dominica for a period of more than 5 years without coming into Dominica would be liable to be removed from the register. That is the existing position. So in other words, if somebody is out of Dominica and they come back at least once in a 5-year period, they're entitled to remain on the register and to be able to vote at any election. But if they don't come back within 5 years, they'll be liable to be removed. So Dennis is proposing that that be increased, so that instead of just maybe coming in once or however many times you want, you would have to come in at least and spend at least 90 days or alternatively 50 days in Dominica, so as to be able to protect that right to remain registered. And of course there's the other school of thought, which is the one that could have some bearing on the confirmation process, which is a school of thought that is that there should be no limitation, and once a person is registered, he or she should remain registered and should only be removed from the register if they die or if they request to have their name removed. Well, obviously, if you think about it, if that should become the law, then there would, seems to me, be an issue as to whether you would need to be confirmed at whatever period. The current recommendation is that every 10 years, according to Sir Dennis, you would have to confirm your name on the register. But if that requirement of absence from Dominica in 5 years were to be removed, that is to say that a person's name would remain on the register indefinitely and would only be removed on death, then the confirmation, you might think, and I would suggest, would become irrelevant and would not be necessary. Since you are in the diaspora, I think the issue of confirmation would be important to you. The other thing that's been discussed is a suggestion that confirmation would take place abroad, overseas, in 4, 5, 6, 10, however many different jurisdictions. That is at clause 52 of Sir Dennis's proposed draft legislation. That's the Draft Registration of Electors Act. And Sir Dennis has put that in square brackets. That's to say that he's not putting it forward as a firm recommendation. He's putting it forward as something that the country might want to think about. So that's something that, again, you might want to discuss and consider tonight. I'm going to conclude by simply addressing something that I addressed a couple of nights ago, which is that I think a significant factor that it seems to me is not being considered or not being considered sufficiently by many in this consultation process, and indeed before it, but it's become very apparent, is that the right to vote is a real right. The issue of voting and democracy is something that has been fought for and hard won. And the move should be towards encouraging and facilitating more people to exercise the franchise and to vote, not towards reducing the capacity and the ability of people to vote. So people should only, I would suggest, and in compliance and conformity with democratic principles, should only be restricted from voting where that is absolutely necessary. So the effort should be to seek to make it easier for people to vote, not more difficult. We don't want to go back to the days when people had to own property to vote. You had to be of a certain status or class, or a certain gender, or sex, depending on the modern language of determining individuals. But the reality is that I would suggest the right to vote should be at the forefront of all our discussions and deliberations. And Section 33(2) of the Constitution establishes a right to vote, and Section 33(2)(b) for any person who is registered, unless that person is disqualified from voting by way of the provisions of the law providing for disqualification. At the current time, there are only 4 grounds for disqualification in our law as it stands. 1, the person is of unsound mind. 2, the person is serving a sentence of imprisonment of 12 months or more. 3, the person is under a sentence of death in a Commonwealth jurisdiction. And 4, the person is disqualified by some other written law. I do not know that ordinary residents or any of the other suggestions that I've heard can properly, and I would suggest cannot properly, be brought within those heads of disqualification. So, ladies and gentlemen, the floor is going to be open to you. If there's anything I can assist on, I will do. But for now, I think we need to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, AG, for that summary. At this point, we are going to open the floor for your comments and feedback. The issue of elections and voting is something that I know all of us are very passionate and very interested in Dominica, and over the last 3 weeks, we have been fully immersed and engaged in this conversation on electoral reform, on elections, on election process, across the length and breadth of Dominica, on social media, in conversations at your offices, probably in your telephone conversations. Everywhere we've had people speaking about this, so this is very important. Probably in their sleep, probably AG and myself in our sleep as well. But I would like to, we have a few hands that are up, so just to go over the process with you. We are in a webinar, so if you would like to speak, you would need to put your hands up. We will call you, and then we will promote you to be a speaker. You can make your contribution, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. So we have a few people who are already lined up, and let's all remember to be respectful of each other's views, as we have said for the last few evenings. So we are going to start with Miss Athenia Benjamin, who is on. Athenia, can you unmute your mic and start, please? Athenia, are you able to hear us? Can you unmute your mic and begin? Okay, I believe you are on now.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you very clearly, Ms. Benjamin, so can you go ahead, please?
Hi, good night. My name is Athena, and I lived in the diaspora for quite a while. And I'm going to share my views on two issues that I think is of great concern to me. I'm living in Dominica right now, but I need to express my views on those two issues. The first one, and I've listened to quite a few of the consultations. I listened to them, I listened to some point of views from the individuals who presented. And one of the issues of the voter ID card, for me, that is a big concern, because you have individuals throwing reference to this in regard to the passport or your driver's license. If you're driving a vehicle and you get stopped by the police, you show your driver's license. If you're traveling, you show your passport as an identification, and comparing that to a voter's ID card. Economically sound decision would not implement a card that you have to gather all this information from to only be used once every 5 years. I think that is not a good, sound decision to make. And you cannot compare a photo ID card to a driver's license or a passport. You have a passport, you travel with it several times, probably several times a year. You go to the credit union, they ask you for ID, you go to the bank, you use your passport as identification. You are, as a driver, you have a driver's license, it's supposed to be on your person every time you sit at the back of a vehicle and you're driving. So it's continuous, you use it all the time. So to draw the reference saying that you use your driver's license when they ask you for your driver's license or your passport, that does not make sense, because those identifications are used routinely. So it's not sound economically to do something you can only use for once. I am of the view that to implement a national ID card that can be used for multi-purpose, not only once every 5 years. That is not good judgment, in my view. The other issue for me, it's about the diaspora vote and the restrictions placed on the diasporans as to whether they have to be here for 5 years or they are given 90 days, as the present law is. They would have to be here for 90 days to register if they have interest in voting in Dominica. I think that should be removed from the process. Most Dominicans living overseas, some of them do not have the ability or the status to vote in the jurisdiction or the countries where they live. And the only place where they can vote is Dominica, the place of their birth, the place that they chose to be a citizen of. And why remove that from them? I've listened to quite a few presentations with people lambasting Dominicans living in the diaspora. And I would just want them to remember that you don't only need the Dominican diaspora when you are in distress. We have to be grateful. When Hurricane Maria hit and Erica, I worked as the coordinator for diaspora affairs for the government of Dominica. And the multitude of Dominicans who came in to support and to do whatever it is they had to do to help us, to remove us from that dire situation. They did it without any thought. They just did it because it was the right thing to do. And now we are in a position where the review of the electoral process is happening. And persons are recommending that there be a restriction for Dominicans living overseas for 5 years. After 5 years, if they did not return to Dominica, then the limit would be removed. I think that is archaic. We cannot go back to how it used to be. We have to improve and be inclusive. International agencies are encouraging small island states to work closely with the diaspora. Because one of the issues, in my understanding, with the sittings that I've had with other organizations, is that in times of disaster, because it's happening so frequent, it is impossible for them to provide the assistance that they need to give those places that are affected. So they are encouraging small island states to work closely with the diaspora, to map out their diaspora. So when we in need of certain expertise, or when there is a disaster, we have a resource that we can tap into. So we cannot, in this dispensation, try to exclude Dominicans from getting involved in the electoral process. It is not a forward-thinking thing to do. We are supposed to include Dominicans, remove the restrictions. Dominicans living overseas, they should not have a restriction to participate in the voting process. It should be onus on them whether they want to participate, but you do not remove the ability to participate. So you excluded them. We've had this divide with the locals and the diasporans. We are supposed to merge that together. And this is one of the opportunities, I think, presented to the government of Dominica to be inclusive and to remove the restriction of the 5 years and let it be limitless. If a Dominican wants to return to vote, they should do so on their free will, but there should not be a law restricting them from participating in the electoral process in Dominica. Our Dominican diaspora have been very good to us, and we need to show them that we embrace them and they are part of us, and we want to work together with them. So on these few words, this is what I have to say this evening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Benjamin, for your contribution. And we are going to move to Mr. Glenford Merrifield and then Donovan Fabian. Glenford Merrifield.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, good evening. We can hear you clearly. Go ahead.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity. Well, hold on. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. Good evening, everyone. I would like to touch tonight on a few of the topics that have been discussed through the various consultations. We have the diaspora and voting that is part and parcel of this, and it seems to be a divisive issue. We have what we say as a condition as residence and domicile. Domicile being where you choose to live, where you have declared that anybody who wants to find you will find you there. You go to the courts, you give your address as your the domicile. You come you conduct business with this address, and that is where anybody who needs you will find you. If you have property on another part of the island, let's say in Portsmouth, you are not allowed to vote in Portsmouth elections because you do not live in Portsmouth, although you have property interest in Portsmouth. So by the same token, we as diasporans who live here in the United States or any other where else, we do not live in Dominica. We may come to visit. We are no longer domiciled in Dominica. And as it is now, the law has always said that if we are absent from the jurisdiction, from our domicile for more than 5 years, we are not allowed to vote. And the AG says, and for the first time tonight, I've heard him actually use the unless disqualified by Parliament. He has always been saying that once you are on the list, you are allowed to vote. So Parliament has spoken in years gone by, and the law has not been changed. It says if we are absent for 5 years, then we are not allowed to vote. Our domicile is elsewhere. And a visit to Dominica does not confer domicile on me, whether I'm here for 2 weeks, for 2 months, or three weeks or 3 months. I am transient. Okay? So in that case, we are not allowed to vote, and I will not promote that part of it. If you want us to do that, then you are going to have to change the law and allow everyone to vote. And the question is, how do you achieve that vote? Paper ballots from outside, electronic voting. And if we do absentee ballots, when is the cutoff period for that ballot to arrive for it to be counted? So we have to think of this very, very carefully. But I, at this moment, would not, because of the small size of our population, it is easy to dilute the votes on island. And we have seen, and it didn't take the CCJ to tell us, it didn't need to take the CCJ to tell us that we have had tainted elections. I don't believe the CCJ should have ventured into this because as they claimed they had no jurisdiction. They were being a political entity at the time. They were making political statements by saying that the elections were tainted. However, they have said it, but we knew before then, even before they said it, that we had tainted elections. So my thing is, no diasporans should be able to vote at this present time if they have been absent. It is said by some that no country takes the citizens off the list once they are registered. I'll tell you that is not true. The United States does not recognize dual citizenship. In Florida here, if you do not vote in 2 federal elections, you are taken off. You are sent a notice, and within 30 days, if you do not respond, then you're taken off by the end of the year. So that is the law that we operate under, and there are many other jurisdictions that have the same some of the same laws. In terms of campaign financing, we've been talking about campaign financing. My thing is there has to be some mechanism to control the source and use of that money. We should not have foreign money coming in to influence the political process. We have seen it. It has happened. I would not place a limit on how much money political parties can raise. However, it must be raised from within the Commonwealth of Dominica, not from outside sources. And however, there should be some limits on personal and corporate contributions in terms of how much. And then if they want to spend beyond that, then they have to organize, like we have here in the United States, super PACs. The Treasury should not have to pay for any financial campaigns. If you can raise your money, then you raise the money, you spend it. However, you can only raise it from within and you account for it. And if you are found out to have taken money from outside sources, then you have to return that money somewhere down the line because it is done here in the United States if you have received illegal contributions. The next thing that I would like to talk about too is the voter ID card versus a state ID card. A voter ID card is specific to a qualified voter, 18 years and over and domicile in the jurisdiction, and he has not been disqualified by parliament based on the laws. Now, some people have been saying the card, the voter's card, is only used once every 5 years and it's a waste of money to spend that. That is not true, because the voter's ID card will be used in every election, whether local or state. And you have multiple election, state and multiple local elections during those periods before that 5-year period of a state election. In terms of expiration date, my voting card has no expiration date, so there should be no expiration date on that voting card. You should only have that card changed if you change the name. For example, you got married, you change your address, okay, or your polling station has been changed, then the electoral office sends you a new one, and those things are free. You don't have to pay for it. Your state ID, any form of state ID, you pay for it. If the state puts an expiration date on it, when it expires, you replace it. Now, some people are talking about, oh, what if I lose my voting card and how am I going to vote? You could make the same argument for the ID card. You could lose it too. The problem is if you do not have your ID card with you, there are ways you can vote. Here in Florida, you would get a provisional ballot. You would vote. They would put that ballot aside, and when they match the signature on that voting ballot with yours, then that vote is counted later. So at the PM, in terms of talking about for the ID card, making the argument for the voter ID card, that Florida uses 14 forms of identification. Yes, we use those to identify you, but that does not qualify you to vote. Your voting card is what makes you eligible to vote, but we can identify you because it does not have a picture, and you bring an ID, a state ID, or one of those other forms of identification that will tell the polling station people who you are. So that thing is erroneous. So I would like to clarify that. I think I have one more thing that I want to talk about. Where is it? List cleansing. Well, it goes on with in tandem with the diaspora stuff, where if you are not absent, if you're absent from Dominica, then you should be taken off the list. If you want to come back at some time, you'll go back to stay in Dominica. You take up residence again. It's easier to get back on the list. You can re-register. Registration is free. You don't have to pay. It doesn't cost you a dime. Now, there's talk about, okay, there is this process with the death certificates and between the registry of deaths, register of deaths, and the electoral office. Yes, that is there. You have there are sometimes though people die, especially if they have migrated, and we do not know if they die. Maybe now you have a little more of tracking this, because now with social media, you have people putting their death announcement on Emo News or calling DBS and put something on there. But if there is not that interaction between the media here with the people who died, their family members, that person is going to stay on the list. So how do you get that person off the list? 5-year absence. would very much take care of that. Now, last night, I heard a recommendation, something that I had been thinking about for a long time, and it was brought up by basically a cousin of mine, and it deals with the Carib chief being the representative or a representative of the Carib people, and that is for a second part of the review. But I would like to echo that statement. The Carib chief should be a non-participant seat in the parliament. While we are at it, for the next part, you need to think about reducing the number of constituencies. In Dominica, it's too small to have 21 constituencies. And we should also have an executive president, get rid of the prime ministership, and have one executive president. Thank you. I hope we see something meaningful come from those discussions, something that is workable and acceptable to everybody. Have a good night.
Good night, and thank you very much for your contribution, Mr. Merrifield. I believe the point that was being made last evening was that there are a number of pieces of identification that could be used in Florida, and based on what you are saying, there are two aspects to it. So there's a voter ID that makes you eligible to vote, but then you can still utilize the 14 pieces of identification to identify who you are. I think what we are looking at in Dominica is how do we combine these two things, what makes you eligible to vote and what identifies you at the polling station. At this time we will take Mr. Donovan Fabian. Donovan Fabian, are you on? Okay, Mr. Fabian, can you unmute your mic and go ahead, please?
Okay. Hello, good evening.
All right, good evening. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Good evening to everyone listening, and also to the observers. Special good evening to you. Before I start my my presentation, I want to correct a few things that the previous caller said. The first one is about residency as it pertains to voting in Dominica. He's totally inaccurate when he says if somebody has a home in one place in Dominica, they cannot vote somewhere else. That's untrue. Okay, once you will vote when you became 18 years of age and you're registered and you live there for 90 days. If you move out of that constituency for work or otherwise, you can still vote where you were registered. Okay, so that is completely inaccurate what he said. Secondly, he spoke about the US does not recognize dual citizenship. I also want to correct that. US laws does not mention dual nationality, or it does not require a person to choose one citizenship over the other. Okay, it does not. And thirdly, on the voter ID in Florida, you can absolutely vote with a driver's license, with a passport, or with any ID that the state deems acceptable. Okay, so I think he was very erroneous, or he missed the facts on those. Okay, to start my presentation, the first thing I want to talk about is national ID card versus voter ID card. I support a national ID card because I think it provides more utility. It can be used for more purposes. What goes into the ID card to enhance the security of the voting, we can discuss that. But I think it just makes more sense to have a national ID card. Secondly, access to media. I completely disagree with some people who say that the state radio or state media should be used should be given to political parties to campaign. I think state media should remain neutral, and especially with the divisive nature of our politics, we really do not want state media to become embroiled in this. And I also oppose the suggestion that private media should be forced to give political parties access. And I also heard, the former Prime Minister of Dominica, Edison James, try to make the case that, they pay a license and they use the airways, which the airspace which belongs to the state. That may be true, but that goes for many other things, right? We pay license to drive on the road. So are you going to say you're going to force bus drivers to carry passengers to where they don't want to go to campaign? That doesn't make much sense to me. Also, one of the most popular and effective ways of campaigning these days is social media. And we have many parties have their platforms, their Facebook pages, their Twitter pages, their WhatsApp groups. Are you going to ask for access to that too? I think not. So I don't think this point is very valid. Next point I want to make is campaign finance. I do not think there should be any cap on campaign finance. And I've heard a lot of allegations being made by certain members of the opposition. And they're trying to use these allegations as the justification for campaign finance. And I've seen and understood that many of them come on to this consultation and they put on a display, an act for the observers. But there are some facts that I think we all should remember and everyone should know. Campaign finance would more aptly apply to the opposition because there have been revelations with evidence provided by people who were close to their party, who were involved in the operation, who admitted to going overseas to Switzerland and soliciting campaign money in exchange for ambassadorships and transferring the money to Dominica to different bank accounts. Bank accounts were provided, dates, transfers, everything were provided. And they have never come out to refute the allegation. And also there was this bombshell allegation in 2019 when Al Jazeera kept the Dominica for months and did an undercover sting operation. And we got audios and videos of Mr. Linton, who was the party leader of the Workers' Party at the time, lawyer, and his friend, another guy who said he acted on his behalf, Odia Serafin, negotiating deals for campaign money, trying to sell ambassadorship for 400,000 US a passport. And there were also MOUs that surfaced with the former leader of the UWP name signed on it, promising to give ambassadorships to somebody if they won election within 28 days of their victory. But these same people come on the consultation and make all kinds of allegations. These are facts in the public, and it cannot be refuted. And my last point is on overseas voters, the so-called diaspora. I read in Sir Barron's report that the objective of this of his report was to modernize the system and to modernize the system and to bring it up to modern best practices. And modern best practices at this time dictates that voting should be made easier for every citizen who has the right, who has been given the right to vote, who is registered on the list of electors. When you're born in Dominica and when you turn 18 years old and you're registered to vote, you should not be disenfranchised because you traveled overseas. All right? Canada Supreme Court said it was not constitutional to do that. And they overturned the law that stood for many years. England has just done it. The USA has this law for years. If you're a US citizen and wherever you live, they send you your ballot. They want the citizens to be part of the process. Because every citizen has the exact same right as the citizen living in Dominica. Traveling does not make you less of a citizen. And we've heard many excuses that if you travel, the laws of the land doesn't affect you. That is nonsensical. Because the diaspora community maintain close contact with the country. They have an interest in their country and the future of their country. And they should have a say as to who's best able to rule it and develop it. Who has shown the ability to do the work for the people. So all these, and I mean, some of the excuses don't make sense. Like I said the last time, they bring the issue of paying income tax. But how can that make sense when in Dominica we have people who don't pay income tax because they don't meet the income tax threshold? Are you gonna say they can't vote too? The elderly who retired, they don't pay income tax. People, children, young people who are just 18 registered going to school, they don't pay income tax. So that is a flawed argument. And it is really mind-boggling that we're living in this modern age where we are all interconnected. We have the observers right now here from different locations across the world, and they're taking part in this consultation with us in Dominica and the diaspora. So I mean, we cannot be going back to the days when voting was a condition upon some material, advantage, some land or money or taxes. That doesn't make sense. And I advocate and I support the right of every Dominican to vote, and I completely reject the suggestion that we have to be back in Dominica for 90 days or 50 days to maintain our rights to vote. And I also would strongly propose that this 5-year arbitrary imposition law be removed, be stricken off the books, because it is arbitrary. As Canada said, it's an arbitrary law that denies people their fundamental rights to vote. I suggest that this be stricken out, and once you are registered to vote, you have the right to vote until the day you die. Thank you very much. Much appreciated the time. Thank you.
As a Dominican in the diaspora, a Dominican who is quite often in Dominica. The next person that we have is Mr. Lennon Matthew. Lennon Matthew. Okay, so I think we have
Yes,
Mr. Matthew with us now.
can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very clearly, Mr. Matthew. Go ahead.
All right. Good evening to you. Good evening to your listeners, the observers here, and to Dominicans living at home and abroad. Interestingly enough, I'm gonna be transparent as possible. As you said, the name is Lennon Matthew, and I'm from the lovely village of Benz. And I'm going to tell you why we should not be fighting one another in Dominica. The cabinet secretary's mom and my mom, and Karen, I'm going to say it, are first cousins. The gentleman who spoke right before me is my first cousin. Love him to death. So here it is, we are in the diaspora, and we are going to speak from different angles of the whole situation. And I am saying this because Dominicans have to understand whatever decisions are made should be in the best interest of the country and not no one political party. Because at the end of the day, we are going to meet together and cry at funerals, celebrate birthdays, wish one another well, and support each other in our personal lives. And I just wanted to make that very clear so everybody know how transparent I am. I have been listening to the conversation on the consultation, both at home and the last time we had for the diasporans. And permit me some time because I think it's very important. And I would first like to start with something said by the Attorney General in his deliberations earlier. He said that voting is a significant factor in the democratic principles. And I am glad he said the democratic principles because I think what is lost in this entire consultation is the bigger purpose for why we having electoral reforms. And in anything in life, you have reforms when the current situation is probably needs to be up to date. It's not working as originally intended. And we all know when time change, rules, laws that were made 40, 50 years ago sometimes have to be amended to keep up with the current times. So therefore, you have consultations, you have reforms. And the reason why I'm happy that the Attorney General mentioned democratic principles, it's because our electoral process does not only begin and end with the voting. Democracy does not begin and end in voting. Democracy is a continuous process that needs the participation of citizens to work. And by that, the voting is correctly a very important and significant factor of that democratic process. In the past few consultations, I have heard arguments about disenfranchisement of voters, and I understand the Constitution, the supreme law of the land, sets up the definition of who is a citizen and the rights of citizens. And as the Attorney General said, Constitution Section 33 2A talks about the right to vote. 2B talks about person's disqualification. As the law stands, and you said, diasporans are not ineligible or prevented from voting. As the law currently stands, citizens of Dominica who live abroad can come home to vote. There is no restriction. Well, I shouldn't say there's no restriction. The law is not necessarily preventing diasporans from voting. What the law has done, like it did in Section 2B, it puts up a qualification for which you can vote. And the reason why I'm mentioning that, because there seems to be a thought that the parliament can go and pass a disqualification for an individual if they're mad. The parliament is not going to sit down and pick who they want to singly disqualify for voting. So therefore, when parliament meets, parliament sets a criteria. One of those criteria is if you have an unsung mind, if you are sentenced for death, That doesn't mean you're not a citizen. You're still a citizen of the country. However, that disqualification is there because the law allows it. Similarly, the law allows you to vote if you are living out of Dominica and within 5 years you return to the country within a day and you can vote. And that is the significance of having a parliament setting the qualifications for voting. And one of the reasons they have done it, as I mentioned when I start, is because you have reforms when the current system becomes out of date. And what we have had in Dominica in our democratic process are individuals who have abused the loopholes. The system is not fair. And the purpose of reform is to ensure that the voice of the people, the strength of the people, and the decisions of the people is what is represented in the government and not the other way around. And I'll tell you a perfect example. Last year, we had a snap election called. And there were individuals who ran for their constituency. And the prime minister decided who was going up for the constituency without having the constituents able to make that decision on who they want to represent. The basic foundation of our democracy is through the political process, where people in the constituency of Pebush, where I'm from, have the ability to select who they want to represent them, whether it's for the Labour Party, whether it's for the United Workers' Party, for the Freedom Party. That's the basics of democracy. Why? It is because it's the decision of the people selecting the representation. So when the Prime Minister goes ahead and selects who he wants to go up in this constituency, what he has effectively done is disenfranchise every single one in this constituency, not allowing them the opportunity to demonstrate their democratic right to select who they want to represent them. So all this talk I'm hearing about disenfranchisement is absolutely hypocritical when we have somebody from the roots of our democratic process disenfranchising people from the Pebush constituency and every other constituency where the people were denied the right to select who they want to represent them. Secondly, we've talked about campaign financing. I don't want us to be naive. We know money is used in corruption. Money can be used for good and money can be used for bad. Currently, there are geopolitical forces that have been playing part in the region for years. It happened during the 70s when we had communism. It is happening now with the elephant in the room, the Chinese. And I think it would be naive of us to deny that fact. And why I'm saying this is because we all know the diplomatic relationships we have with that country. We all look at the news, we all see the competition of the types of government we have, the types of economies we have, where they are communist and capitalist mix. And we see the kind of influence that is going around the world. And there are forces that are fighting the democratic principles and the democratic norms. And we are moving towards strongmen, dictatorships, and there are those who will seek power no matter what the cause and no matter what the effect. And therefore, if we do not pay attention to those things, I think we are on a fool's errand. And like I said earlier, we can sit here and discuss. Personally, I think spending $600,000 to have a consultation to decide voter ID cards, national ID cards, is a waste of time. That's a simple solution. You have an ID card that has information of your polling stations, whether you want to call it national ID, as long as the card has all the information to identify you as the individual, identify what polling station you are, and can serve the purpose of ensuring that Jack Rabbit is Jack Rabbit who votes in polling station 1. That's a no-brainer. And I have also heard the argument that getting voter ID cards is expensive. And the same ones who say it's expensive are the same ones who say there should be confirmation and registration of voters overseas. So let's be realistic. One of the ways we cleanse the voter list is by removing dead people on the voting list. The simplest thing the government could do. I'm not saying political party, the government. And that means I'm referring to every government, whether it's Labour, Freedom, or UWP. The simplest thing they could do is cleanse the voting list out of dead people. There's a process in place. The law outlines what that process is. It involves the village councils. It involves the chairman. Ask any Dominican when was the last time that had been done. Now, if a simple task of getting dead people out of the list cannot be performed by our governance structure, how then are we going to trust our government to perform a good job in confirmation of voters overseas? It makes absolutely no sense. And like I said, while we're talking about who can vote and who cannot vote, the bigger picture is democracy, advancing fairness. And that's where that comes in. Because as a diasporan, if I fall within the current laws as an eligible voter, and I have been to Dominica as the law currently stands within 5 years and I can vote, then the decision to confirm registration or registered voters overseas is not a party decision. It's a government decision. And therefore, the institution that is constitutionally mandated by law to do that is the Electoral Commission. So therefore, if the Electoral Commission were to do that, the whole point about that decision is to ensure that every eligible citizen has the equal opportunity to be able to be confirmed and to maintain their right to vote. If the government cannot perform that and ensure that every Dominican is duly registered and not disenfranchised, then the best option is to not deal with that at all. And the best option is to let Dominicans in Dominica vote. Because if at this point we cannot clear a list out of dead people, then how are you telling me you are going overseas to do registration or re-registration of people? I don't understand.
Lennon,
Yes.
I would not want anybody to think that because you are my cousin, I'm going to allow you to speak for the entire evening. So we do have a long line of speakers after you. We've been on for a little while. I knew you asked for some time, but
Yes.
we are going to move on. So I would
Yes,
like you, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to wrap up.
Can I make one point? This is the last consultation. This is my first time on here. There are several people who have called multiple times, and I know you didn't say anything to stop them. So, but I will respect your decision. No, you had me lost my friend.
I'm sorry, but we would like to move on. So let's just wrap up.
Okay. Well, at the end of the day, while we are all discussing electoral reform, I think to truly get electoral reform in Dominica, the vision has to be what's in the best interest for the people of Dominica and the people of Dominica making that decision. And if Parliament sees it fit that there is an unfair advantage of having diasporans, understanding that the margin for error sometimes is one vote in a constituency, the objective has to ensure, one, there is democracy, full democracy. Two, that the results of the election represents the intentions of the people. Three, there is no unfair influence through money or other means by international sources, by other countries and individuals who have self-interest. And four, that the people who benefit from this consultation process and whatever law passes is the people of Dominica and no one individual. Thanks for the limited time, family, and I do hope that you guys are operating in the best interest of the country. Still love you guys. As I said before, this cannot be about individuals. It has to be about the population. It has to be about the people of Dominica. And I know I've been cut short, but you know I'm happy for the limited time that I've been given, and hopefully my points will be of some significance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lennon. I would like to be fair to everyone, my family and all others. But we appreciate your comments. There are just a few things. I want to add, though, that for those who are unable to give all of the comments that you would like to, please feel free to send your comments in writing to capsec@dominica.gov.dm. But before we move on, I would like the AG to respond on one or two matters.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Just a couple of clarifications. In relation to the last contributor, he said that every Dominican knows, or something to the effect of that people are not being removed, deceased people. I haven't checked myself, so I cannot speak as a matter of fact. Although I received an indication on my phone, someone who had the experience of their family member had passing away, and that person was removed within quick time. But what I can tell you is that I get copied in on details of people who are deceased, which is conveyed by the registrar to the Chief Elections Officer. Chief Registration Officer, both one and the same, on a regular basis. And I just went back and looked, and the last that I received was on the 16th of August, covering 6 month period. So I think people have these notions. Sorry, it's not. Sorry, it's covering the quarter. So people have these notions, but it's not true. I can't say what is actually happening in specific terms, but I know that the list goes regularly to the Electoral Office, and I would anticipate that they remove names from that based on the information they receive. If the chair would allow me, just briefly, the previous caller, that's Mr. Merrifield, referred to me specifically, and he indicated that I hadn't mentioned disqualification. Just for his edification, I mentioned disqualification in the context of Section 33.2 on every occasion that I have spoken about Section 33.2. And indeed, I mentioned it so much so that on one occasion, I couldn't remember the fourth disqualification. That was at the parish hall. And I came back to the microphone to clarify and actually put the information out so that everybody had it. So just to say that we try, and certainly I try, to be as clear and as fair and as practical and as objective as I can be in relation to these matters. But it is, I think there's also an error, and that's why I touched on it briefly, and a confusion with the issue of domicile residence and Section 33. Section 33 has two, Section 33.2 has two elements to it, an A and a B. And they're not conjunctive in the sense of being an and. They are two alternative scenarios. And just to put it out there, and it might be part of the further discussion, that the section dealing with absence from Dominica in the 5 years that Parliament provided for, it may well be that the reason that Parliament, and this is just to I have my own views, but I just put it out there so that people may want to consider this. It may well be that what I submit is the position that Section 33.2b of the Constitution provides that once a person is registered, the only way they can be disqualified or cannot, let me say it differently, the only way they cannot be entitled to vote is if they fall within one of the four categories of disqualification. It has nothing to do with residence, nothing to do with domicile, once they're registered. And I would suggest that it may well be that it is in light of that fact that Parliament, at some point in the past, thought that it was necessary to impose a 5-year limitation. Because in the absence of that 5-year limitation, what some people are asking for now, which is that there should be no limitation upon someone who's registered, would prevail. So it may be that that 5-year limitation that some people are referring to is an indication that there is indeed a right to vote once registered. I'll pause there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, AG, for that clarification. I believe we have Mr. Kirby Samuel who is on. Kirby, can you go ahead, please?
Good evening, CAPSEC, and good evening to the Honorable Attorney General. I'd also like to say good evening to the observers who have been with us through this exercise time and time again, and to everyone who has been listening. I have, whenever possible, sought to tune in to listen to the discourse, and I had to tonight join in to give my own 2 cents. As a Dominican, and not just a Dominican, but as a proud Dominican currently residing overseas, respectfully, I find it highly offensive that persons would seek to limit or take my right to exercise my franchise in my country. As I speak to you, I can think of at least 3 friends, in addition to me, 4 of us, who have in the last 2 years either built a home in Dominica or are currently building a home in Dominica. And it offends me greatly that persons would peddle that I am less of a Dominican and therefore I cannot vote. The right to vote is a right that persons died so that we could have, so that I could have as a Dominican. And I just find it highly offensive. So that is my first point. I understand from time to time that there is a need, and there would be a need for persons to, or for us to reset and for us to look at things again. The idea of a voter's ID card is one of the first and the main things that members of of opposition parties have said, well, we need a voter's ID card, we need a voter's ID card. I am not against a voter's ID card. To be clear, in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas where I reside, there are voters' ID cards are allowed. All right, and persons use it for everyday transactions as well. It's a flimsy card, but it's there. But when I was preparing to join this event tonight, I went on the electoral site of the Bahamas just to check something out. And under the requirements, I think it's elections.gov.bs for anyone who wants to check it out. Under the requirements to register to vote, one of the first, or in the number 1 line, it says the primary document that can be used and should be used to register to vote is a passport. I think we would be going down a wrong and slippery slope if we were to say that an identification card issued by the state, an identification card like my passport, which begins, or which on the first hardcover says, the president in the name of the Commonwealth of Dominica requests and requires that you let this person through without let and hindrance. A document so sacred that it should be preferred or said that I cannot use it to vote. But if persons want to have a voter's ID card, by all means, let's have it. St. Kitts has a similar voter's ID card as well. If we can have a card where it's renewed every 5 or 10 years, fine. But I think if we decide that we want it so much, certainly let's have it. It will cost the state. That will be money that will be taken away from other programs like the Yes We Care program and others. But if it's deemed necessary, let's do it. But I want to address this fallacy that certain persons have, because I do not want the observers to leave Dominica with the misguided view that certain persons have tried to peddle, that dead persons vote in Dominica and elections are tainted and all of that. There's something that I have been listening intently, hoping that some persons would have highlighted throughout the consultations. And as a caveat or as a disclaimer, subject to correction, I'm not sure if somebody said it when I was not logged in, but this is this point. At elections in Dominica, at every single polling station in every single polling district, there are representatives from both political parties or all political parties who are present at each and every polling station. And those are representatives from that community. In the case of the community that I am from, right? When I would have gone to vote, I would see persons from the Labour Party, at the time persons from the Freedom Party, at the time persons from the UWP Party. These are persons from within the community. And these persons would have been persons that know every single person within the community. And so if a dead man came and said, my name is John Brown, and I'm here to vote, it is very likely that one of those persons from one of those divides would have objected and said, hey, no, John Brown died. Or, hey, no, this man ain't from here. We don't know him. And if that had happened, there would have been, of course, the press would have eaten it up. We would have heard it being discussed on social media and on everywhere, and it would have been running, and people would have been making mileage with it. So to give the notion, this silly, really, notion that, oh, dead people been voting, and oh, people voting twice. Ridiculous. When you vote, you dip your hand in ink and you leave. I really do not want anyone to have this misconception that Dominica is so backward, that we do not know, or that we are so behind. This whole fallacy of electoral reform, in the sense from 19 just, if there are ways that we can strengthen, let's do. But come and give persons misguided view. The honorable observers from the OAS, the OECS, CARICOM, and Commonwealth Secretariat, and whoever else, leave Dominica thinking that our democracy is in such an infancy stage. Our democracy lacks such credibility that we need this reform now. If we want to check for certain things, let us do that. If we want to make some slight corrections, fine, let us do that. Put recommendations forward, let's do that. Let's move forward. I am not even going to advocate for my right to vote from where I'm at. But as I said, I take it completely, or I'm completely offended, or I would be completely offended if anyone were to say to me, as a hardworking Dominican who lives overseas, that I cannot vote, especially when I have chosen myself, and I'm going to use myself as the example, to build my home in Dominica. And I'm not the only one. Everyone and every Dominican, if you drive up and down the west coast of Dominica, you will see persons who would have spent their lives in England and other places and returned home and built homes. My own uncle of blessed memory lived in England and built a fine home in Marigot before he passed. And so I want us to be very careful, because this is a slippery slope. This is a slippery slope. And anyone who should feel or should think that they would want to try to disenfranchise me or any other Dominican who would make such a significant contribution, I think that would be wrong. And I want to say that categorically clear for the record. To build a house in Dominica is not easy. And let's be clear, the ones who are saying diasporans should not vote, when you build a house at home, a contractor gets a job, his workers gets a job, their families get fed. And not only that, if you choose to remain overseas for some time, that adds to the housing stock in Dominica, and you're able to provide rental properties to persons who may not be able to build a home yet. And so I want us to be very clear on this issue. I think it is wrong. I think it is a wrong approach for anyone to suggest that a Dominican who resides overseas should not be able to vote. And I hear persons talking about, oh, diasporans, and they should let, the vote is tainted if diasporans come in, and they should let, I think I heard one person say, indigenous Dominicans. I'm like, wait, what am I? And so I wanted to really call and hone in on this point this evening, And I really want to thank you for allowing me the opportunity. Just before I go, Madam Capsec, if you'll allow me one other thing. One of the callers, I think it's the one before, made a statement that was so erroneous, I just feel that I have to address it. He levied comments against the Honorable Prime Minister where he said he disenfranchised persons in Paybush and by choosing who to go up. Ridiculous, hogwash nonsense. Every political party has the right, and the Honorable Prime Minister was within his right as the leader of the Dominican Labour Party to, with his council, his party council and executive, decide who goes up in what constituency to represent the party at elections. No one is disenfranchised. If a person feels or felt that they were disenfranchised, they would have been able to, like the law allows them to, take their $500 and go and pay it into the treasury and run as an independent candidate. Persons are talking about elections in Dominica are not fair. We currently have an opposition leader who is an independent candidate. We currently have other representatives or another representative who is an independent candidate. So that alone tells us that if someone feels that the will of the people, quote unquote, is being stifled, then by all means, pay your $500 to the treasury, my brother, and go and run as an independent. So I just wanted to correct that error. Madam Chairperson, Madam Capsec, thank you so much for the time. I do not intend to take up much more of it because I know that there are many other persons who would like to contribute. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Kebi, for that contribution, and we do appreciate your views all the way from the Bahamas. I believe we have Miss Frances Del Sol, who is on. Frances? We also have Mr. Jerome Victor, so any of you who could come on can do so now. Jerome Victor or Frances Del Sol? Okay, Frances, I believe you are on now. Can you unmute your mic and start?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Good evening, Madam Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to express my thoughts on this very critical issue. I recognize the presence of Honorable Levi Peter, the international observers, and my fellow Dominicans. I'm going to start off by saying recently I have been involved in helping asylum seekers in mainly coming from mainland Africa, most of them fleeing persecution. A large portion of them are from Sudan. And I have to say what they would give, the only shirt they have on their backs, the only shirt they arrived with in Canada, to be a part of this consultation, a process like this where they can contribute openly, to be a part of a discussion forum like this for the development of their homeland. The irony of this should not be lost on any of us as to our ability to speak freely and openly, regardless of our political positions, on something so critical to the running and future development of our nation home. In saying so, I commend the Labour Party with the majority government and really the option to take whatever course of action they deem necessary at this time in regards to this issue, but has instead opened this forum to all and sundry to provide their thoughts, supporters and non-supporters alike, indicating that this government is truly a collaborative one and a Dominica first one. Dominica has shown remarkable progress considering the trough, Erica and Maria. The world still marvels at the turnaround and that we have done in Dominica, and there is still so much to do. Therefore, the concept, in my opinion, the concept of putting any money into a one-time, over 5-year use of a voter ID card, when persons in most advanced countries use government-issued IDs such as passports and driver's licenses, is not a proper use of the funds that could go towards education or seniors' care. I think all this talk about dead people voting are just red flags to support or give reason to others' failures to win at the polls. Enough already with this nonsense. We're just making ourselves look stupid in the international arena. My father died in Canada, and I know for a fact that nobody in my family said he had died, but he's no longer on the list. So I also marvel at all these people that are tied up with the government providing travel for voters. My mother, in the early 1990s, received a free ticket to come and vote for, as a Freedomite in Granby. That was, the Labour Party wasn't in power then. That being said, many of us have the capacity and the ability to come down to vote. You mustn't assume that Dominicans are going to wait for a ticket just to exercise their right to vote, are waiting on a free ticket. It's not that way, or that we're enticed to do that. This morning, I decided to look at my passport, and in between May 2016 and December of 22, I've been to Dominica 11 times for more than 3 weeks on each occasion. For the last, every time I travel to Dominica, I say, this is home. I am going home. Home is where the heart is. Home is where we say in Dominica, where your boy, your berry. Home is where you contribute when and as necessary, because it's our homeland. We are afforded this birthright, being Dominicans, and all that comes with it, including our right to vote, and that must not be taken away from us. As a member of the diaspora, it must not be interpreted that some of us who don't, because we don't speak up all the time or we don't make the most noise, that we don't have opinions on those matters. Yes, we do. And others have mentioned it, but I want to conclude with something that has caused me consternation, having been very much involved in Dominica and a member of the diaspora, is that certain sections of our islands perceive the diaspora in a negative light, and that I find very troubling. We do the right things. We send the barrels, we send money via Western Union and MoneyGram, and we come down and we buy tickets for the Creole Festival, but we ought to be more integral, to be seen as more integral to the well-being of our country, that we have been and continue to be a significant part of rebuilding of Dominica. Most of us plan to come back home or a building at home after retirement. Most of us believe Dominica is better off today than when we left it. Most of us give back above and beyond. Most of us want to do what is right and have a say in the goings on in our country. Therefore, on behalf of the silent majority, I appeal to the observers to listen to us. The majority of us in the diaspora ask for and kindly retain and reserve our right to vote unless we say individually we no longer wish that privilege. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Frances. And I must say thank you for all that you do for Dominicans in Dominica while you are in the diaspora. I think we are all very much aware of your efforts and that of many others overseas. I believe the next person we had was Jerome Victor. Okay, Paul Alexander. I believe Paul Alexander is on, and then we have Gregor Joseph. Paul Alexander, Gregor Joseph. We also have Ambrose Thomas lined up. I believe you need to, our staff man in the Zoom, they are sending you a request. You need to accept the request to be a panelist so that you can be given the rights to speak. So if you get a request, okay, I believe Gregor Joseph is on now. Can you go ahead, Gregor? Gregor, you are on. Are you ready to speak? Unmute your mic. And then you can go ahead. I believe we also had... Okay, Gregor, I think you are unmuted now. Can you go ahead, please?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you very clearly.
Okay, good evening to all. First, I want to recommend the Prime Minister on the recommendation of the President in the Caribbean. I think that was well deserved. And I want to touch on a few things. I had something prepared, but because of all people calling, I'm going to change what I'm going to say. I want to pose 3 questions to the AG. Who was the first prime minister before this prime minister that came overseas and brought people to Dominica to vote? That's 1. Number 2, who was the prime minister before this prime minister that called election before the scheduled date? That's 2. Number 3, I have a problem with when was Mr. Lincoln became the treasurer for the prime minister? He seems to have how much money the prime minister collect, how much money the prime minister spend, but if all the money that they collected, with donations that we give, up to now they cannot give us an amount of how much they have collected. Now I know the observers are listening, so I hope they're taking note of that. And I had quite a thing to say, but I'm sorry, I'm an officer, so I had a call and I kind of lose some of what I was going to say. 1 second. Now, overseas voters, it appears that the UWP does not want us to come home to vote. If my memory serves me right, they were asking us, they was asking for donation with the election campaign. And if my memory serves me right, they had 3 phone lines. They had 2 local lines from Dominica and they had a diaspora line. So how is it okay for the diasporas to contribute money to your campaign, but now you're turning around and trying to tell us we cannot come to vote in the same election that you collect money from us for? So maybe you should start thinking of how to give us back our money that you collected. Sorry, my phone is ringing, so I have to run. Sorry about that. I'm an officer and we're kind of busy. But I will come back if I can. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gregor, for joining us. We know you had a short time, but at least you were able to make a contribution from your contribution from the diaspora. We have Paul Alexander, who is on now. Paul, can you unmute your mic and go ahead, please?
Yes, good evening to everyone.
Yes, good evening.
I want to thank you for accepting my call and giving me the privilege to be part of this forum tonight. So the reason why I am participating in this consultation is because I am a Dominican and also a voter. If I was not interested in voting in Dominica or taking part in what's happening in Dominica, I would not waste my time and waste you all time to be there taking time to speak nonsense when I'm not interested in voting. I will just stay out of that completely. I also want people to know that in the last 5 elections held in Dominica, I voted in every single one. And every one of the last 5 elections were held before the 5-year term had ended. So which means I had never been outside of Dominica for 5 years before I voted again. If you check the dates of the last 5 elections from the date before when the last election was held, it has always been less than 5 years before a new election. Now, as a patriotic Dominican, I want to read the words of a song I used to sing in school when I was a kid. This song was written not by a Dominican, not for Dominica, but you would swear the man had Dominica in mind when he wrote this song. It said, "Before all lands in east or west, I love my native land the best. With God's best gift, it's steaming. No gold or jewels here are found, yet men of noble soul abound, and eyes of joy are gleaming. Before all tongues in east or west, I love my native tongue the best. Though not so smooth so smoothly spoken, now woven with Italian art, yet when it speaks from heart to heart. The word is never broken. Before all people east or west, I love my countrymen the best. A race of noble spirit, a vigorous mind, a generous heart, to virtue bound yet free from art, they from their sires inherit. To east and west I reach my hand, my heart I give my native land. I seek her good, her glory. I honor every nation's name, respect their fortunes and their fame, but I love the land that bore me. So as a patriotic Dominican who believes in Dominica, I had to be on this forum tonight. Now, we know this proverb, a bad workman quarrels with his tools. Now, a former caller mentioned it, that in every polling district, in every polling station, there are agents of every political party. And they have the tools they are available for them to track fraud or dead people or people whose name are not on the list and they want to vote. And maybe they are not using it or they don't know how to use it. So they blame the election loss on fraud, election being stolen, dead people coming in to vote, people voting on people's name. And there's never been one instance where it has been proven that has ever happened. Now, we know these people also have the right to raise an objection, a right to challenge someone they suspect of coming in to put a fraudulent vote. I also remember the story of King Solomon, where two women each had a baby, and one of the babies died, and the two women were claiming the live baby to be theirs, and they could not decide which one the baby had belonged to. So they decided to go to King Solomon to find out what is his advice, how they can solve this problem. So King Solomon, in his wisdom, he said, well, what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut this baby in two. I'll give each of you half of the baby. The mother whose baby had died, who knows that was not her baby, she said, yes, okay, go ahead, cut it in two. Right away, King Solomon said, this baby does not belong to you. So it's like the opposition. When they realize they do not have the support in the diaspora, they want to go against diasporans who are supporting the government from trying to prevent them having the right to vote. Now, they advocate for free and fair election. But while they're asking for free and fair election, at the same time, they're trying to unfairly deny a free man and woman to vote freely in Dominica. So you can see they do not love Dominicans. I am from Grand Bay, I live in St. Thomas. We organize carnival troops in St. Thomas Carnival. And what we have for our troop is the Sensei. And we don't call it a St. Thomas Carnival troop. We call it the Dominica Afro-Caribbean Mass. We were invited to Bermuda to bring that carnival troop of Sensei to participate in Bermuda Carnival. We not go to Bermuda from St. Thomas like we are St. Thomians, we representing St. Thomas in Bermuda. We went there as Dominicans living in St. Thomas who went to promote the culture of Dominica in Bermuda. So to tell us that when we leave Dominica, we are no longer Dominicans is like you are committing a sin that cannot be pardoned. Now, I am totally against limiting the amount of time a Dominican can stay overseas before coming back to Dominica to vote. Once you are Dominican for life. We should totally eliminate this thing in the law about 5 years or 10 years or 15 years or 90 days or 30 days. That does not make any sense. For those who are against people living overseas coming to vote and they're saying, well, you're sending a barrel. What's in a barrel? But at the same time, they said we are trying to put pressure or a burden, a government on our people who will be suffering the consequences. But let's look at it. If you say before the 5-year terms is up, I have to come to Dominica for a period of 90 days. Now, I come during that period of 90 days, and then I vote, and I go back to St. Thomas. What difference does it make if I had come for 1 day and vote and come back? I'm still living in St. Thomas. And what you are saying about I'm leaving the burden on the people, it comes to the same thing. So it makes no sense whatsoever. Now, on ID cards, I support ID card, any form of ID. They come up with an argument saying that a passport is to travel, but you can take that same passport and go to the bank and cash your check. A driver's license is for driving, and if you have an accident, the police will ask you for a driver's license. But a same driver's license, you can use it to go to the bank to cash your check. So the other IDs or national IDs that are provided by the state can also be used to vote, because somebody can use their voting card the same day while they're going to vote. And when they arrive at the polling station, they do not have the ID card. So what are they going to do? They're going to tell them, well, you cannot vote? No, well, do you have a driver's license? You have something else that can identify you as Paul Alexander? Then we say, yes, here it is, and then you can vote. So voting is not something like you have to try to prevent people from voting or put all kind of obstacles in their way to frustrate them, and then they say, oh, I'm not going to vote. When we talk about free and fair election, if an election is about to happen and you block roads and you set fire and you threaten to cut off people's necks, you are preventing people from going and vote, so that the election cannot be fair. And the people who have been doing that have gone scot-free without even being arrested, even being tried in court. So the same people who are making all the fuss about free and fair elections, they are the ones who want elections not to be free and fair, because by their conduct, by what they are doing, we can see they are against the voting process. And when they speak about dictator, if they are ever given a chance to form the government again, that's when we will see dictatorship in Dominica. So on the question of campaign finance, a lot of people has already given the views on that, and to me the general consensus is every political party raise your money. It's not the other party's business how much money you can raise, how much money you raise. You raise what you can raise. You want to win, you do what is needed to be done to win. So I'm hoping that at the end of all these consultations, the general consensus will be what the people want. Some people say, the people say this, the people want this, the people are standing for this. But when you ask them who are the people, you saw them in the demonstration that was held last week or week before. These are the people who they are talking about, who want this, who say this, who are standing for this. But the majority of the people in Dominica who are for progress, peace, and prosperity, they want electoral modernization. And what they want is what's happening in the world. Over 115 countries have made it easier for their citizens living abroad to exercise their right to vote in their country. They have removed all kind of terms and limits. Santo Domingo, 14% of its population live overseas. And they do not even have to return to Santo Domingo to vote. They can vote wherever they are living outside of Santo Domingo, and their votes are sent to Santo Domingo to be counted. In Dominica, whether we get ticket from our party to come down to vote, whether we pay our own way, we are not going to allow our names being removed on the list because we do not live in Dominica, because many of us contribute more to Dominica than Dominicans who are residing in Dominica. Because when we send money, we send barrels, we send what we send is to alleviate the pain and pressure and any burden that our people are feeling in Dominica. After natural disasters such as Erica and Maria, you saw the contributions of Dominicans who live overseas. And the World Bank had a report stating after Erica, Maria, and COVID, during the time period just after these disasters and the pandemic, Dominicans living overseas contributed $560,000 as remittances to Dominica, over $500 million EC dollars. So which means the Dominican diaspora is so important, so connected to Dominica, that they will bend over backwards and do all what they can do to help their people back home. They also have to support a family abroad where they live and work extra hard to have extra money to send for their relatives and friends in Dominica. So the observers have heard a lot, and they know the sentiment of the Dominican people when it comes to electoral modernization and what they're standing for. We are standing for progress. We are standing for modernization. We are not trying to reinvent the wheel. We are moving forward. We are going to show ourselves and take our rightful place in the international community with the rest of the world that's given the citizens a free ride, a privilege, the rights to come down to their country and vote and enjoy themselves as Dominicans wherever they live, whether in Timbuktu, whether in space, wherever. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for allowing me to contribute to this historical forum tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Alexander, for your contribution. And I believe we have Mr. Ambassador Martin Charles on. I'm not sure if he qualifies as a member of the diaspora now, but welcome, Ambassador Charles.
Thank you very much. And it's indeed an honor and privilege for me to make my contribution this evening. Actually, I've been following all of the consultations except for the one of last night. But I would like to just, first of all, extend my congratulations to the Honorable Prime Minister and the Cabinet for having chosen a Kalinago woman to be our next president of Dominica. These consultations, as if I may reference when the IMF came during our austerity period, and also we had the World Bank doing an audit of Aid Bank, where recommendations were made, and all recommendations were not accepted wholesale. I view this electoral reform as a way of modernizing our electoral process. But in section 3 of that report, it makes mention of the equitable use of the government media during election campaign. The commission, it says, must monitor the equitable allocation of airtime. But my question is, who assumes the liability in case of one political party goes about slandering people or whatever the case is? Who would assume the liability if, for example, DBS Radio, the state-owned radio, legal action is taken against them? Because in the great United States, we see, for example, that when Donald Trump is having his rallies, that CNN do not broadcast his rallies live, in fear that he may say something that will cause them to be sued. And so this is something I think that we have to pay attention to as it relates to the use of the state-owned media. The opposition, I listened to the opposition, and they've also suggested that the private media houses, like, for example, Kyrie FM, should also afford them that opportunity to be able to come on the radio station to say whatever they want. But I do not believe that the government can legislate for private media houses to allow political parties to be able to come to do whatever they want to do using that medium. So I am not in favor of this. On the question of the voter ID card, like other Caribbean countries, I believe that, and as the government has already articulated, that the multi-purpose ID card would be the preference. But the question is, assuming that someone shows up to vote and that person is not in possession of that multi-purpose card or voter card, would that person be deprived of voting? I would respectfully suggest that in addition to this voting card or multi-purpose card, however it's called, that a picture ID should suffice should that person not be in possession at the time of that voter ID card, be it your passport, your driver's license, your social security card. Once, because we've never really had any problems per se with our elections. And persons, I mean, we live in a small society in Dominica where we know everybody. Persons have not been taken to court, not en masse or otherwise, to suggest that they impersonated anyone and came to vote. So this whole question of this voter ID is something that will help us modernize our electoral process. But this, as I said, on our small population, we've never had any problems with people coming to vote. You come in, you identify yourself, you give your name, you after you finish casting your ballot, you place your finger in the ink, and that's it. And we've never had any issues with persons coming to vote. On the question of campaign finance reform, I believe that the Treasury should stay far away from this. That approval should not be granted to allow any political party access to the Treasury of Dominica. Because at the end of the day, this will be a liability to the taxpayers of Dominica. Look at the Dominican Labour Party. Dominicans give to the Dominican Labour Party in cash and kind, not for favors or for bribes. They give because they believe that the policies and plans of the Dominican Labour Party are best suited for the country. And so this thing about the UWP trying to get monies from the Treasury, these guys probably do not have the ability, they do not have the connections, the friends to help them to raise the resources to run their campaign. And so their last resort is to turn to the Treasury of Dominica. We saw in 2 past elections where Al Jazeera exposed them, that they were willing to give our diplomatic passport just because they wanted to raise money for their campaign. They have no friends. And so the Dominican Labour Party have not engaged in any unfair practice. The Dominican Labour Party has its friends that supports its policies and programs, and as a result, provides financial support and other forms of support to the party because they believe in the party. Now, on the question of the Electoral Commission, Sir Dennis Byron suggested that the membership should be increased. I respectfully suggest that no matter how many members you have on this Electoral Commission, that this won't make a difference in terms of the administration and structure of the Election Commission. What I believe is needed is that there should be an improvement in the general administration of the Electoral Commission. On the question of registration or re-registration and confirmation, and that must be done, as I understand it, within 9 months after the passage of the bill. But my question is, what of persons who are unable to meet this 9-month deadline? Automatically, I assume they will be taken off the list. But is that an infringement of their constitutional right to vote? This is a question probably the legal minds need to think about and to provide some clarity to the general public. But the UWP, they are targeting only just one man. And all what they are saying, all the machination about electoral reform, their mission is to see how they can remove Honorable Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit out of government. And that's their preoccupation. It's not about any person coming impersonating someone or persons coming from the diaspora. They just want to get rid of one person who they believe stand in their way of forming a government. In 2014, if you remember, and Madam Chair, I really hope that you bear with me just to make this comment, that in 2014, we saw when the UWP went to Canada in the cold winter, they went to Boston and Washington, I believe, begging Dominicans to contribute to their campaign and also asking Dominicans to come back to vote for them. We saw in 1995, they were the ones that started this thing about bringing the diasporans here to vote en masse in 1995. So it's ironic now that these same people are today trying to disenfranchise the diasporans from coming down to vote. I mean, it's just despicable. When we look at this other recommendation, Madam Chair, as it relates to the 50 to 90 days that persons must be resident in Dominica. You know, I heard a speaker when the political parties were at the State House, and he made the point that the Constitution indicates that you must be resident in Dominica. But I think this was one of the most disingenuous comments that was made that evening. Because whilst it is true that you must be in Dominica, but it also makes provision that if you overseas, that within 5 years, you must be in Dominica at least one time. And we see the very people that come down to vote are the ones that are always in Dominica during Creole Festival, during Carnival. They are in Dominica. These are the very same people that come down to vote. But when they come, they see the progress that is happening in Dominica. And so they fall in love with the policies and plans and programs of the Dominica Labour Party. So in asking for them to be in Dominica, either 50 days or 90 days, I mean, I believe that Sir Dennis Byron just put this in there because he wanted to evoke some discussion as it relates to that. But at that very same meeting, I heard a lawyer who is an American indicated that he is in Dominica for almost 40 years. And every 4-year cycle of the United States elections, he received his absenteeism ballot in Dominica where he's able to vote. I'm saying that we should eliminate totally this requirement of being in Dominica once every 5 years in order that you could cast your ballot. I'm saying this, if we're trying to modernize and make voting much easier for all of us, that I believe the time has come. And just coming from the consultations, you could have listened to the sentiments being echoed that this 5 year, once every 5 years, this should be eliminated. I am fully in support of this, fully in support. Because, as I said earlier, the UWP are not really interested in electoral reform. Because if they were serious, whilst there's that opportunity for them to attend the consultations, make their contributions, they have called for demonstration, which backfired on them, by the way. They have called for demonstration, people in the streets demonstrating for electoral reform, and you have that process being carried out. If these guys, if these guys want to make meaningful contributions to the consultations, I believe as a serious party, and they're not, that they would have come night after night and make those contributions in a very respectful way. But I have listened, as I said, to most of the consultations, except one last night. I mean, when you look at what is coming from the opposition, their thing is to prevent people from the diaspora to come down to vote. That is their preoccupation. Because they believe that it's the diasporan votes that is causing the Labour Party to win elections. That is their preoccupation. And number two is to get rid of Prime Minister Skerrit at any cost and all cost. So this is something I believe that the Dominican people have seen right through. On the question, and lastly, Madam Chair, the Dominican Labour Party in government represents the majority of Dominicans. So when these guys come and say that they represent the majority of Dominicans, or they represent Dominicans, they do not speak for the majority of Dominicans. We have heard the majority of Dominicans throughout these consultations. And the majority of Dominicans are fully in support of the measures that have been proposed by the Dominican Labour Party in moving electoral process forward. And so I would like to commend the government and yourself, Madam Chair. I would really like to commend you all for the professionalism that you all have brought to these consultations. You have allowed all ideas to contend, not treating anyone with disrespect or talking in any condescending way to anyone, but you'll have treated persons with respect. And so persons were free to make their contributions without fear of intimidation. But I don't know in which society that we see the minority wants to control the majority. The Dominican Labour Party and the government represents the majority of Dominicans. And so the majority of Dominicans are with the Dominican Labour Party. And so whatever recommendations that are acceptable to the Dominican Labour Party, we are fully in support of this. The minority just cannot control the majority. So again, I would like to thank you very much for allowing me this time to make this short intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Charles. Not so short, but we do appreciate your interventions, and all the best over there in China. I believe we have Mr. Anthony Astefan on, Senior Counsel. Are you with us?
Yep. Good night. Good night to the officials that are here and to the observers. I'm sorry my voice is like this. I did not intend to speak, but seeing it's the last one, I could not ignore it. And if I may just give some constitutional context to the issues, because I think many a time when I've listened, there's been much strain away from the critical issue. In the case of Joseph Parry versus Mark Brantley, which I lost, Court of Appeal case from Nevis, and it's good sometimes to lose cases that make good law. This was a case in which it said, the Court of Appeal said it was an egregious breach of the Constitution for the registration officer and others to remove people from the voters list without the fullest, strictest compliance with the protection of the law. And this is what the court said in relation to the interpretation of the right to vote and the laws that govern the right to vote. Paragraph 50, page 32 of the judgment. The Canadian Supreme Court has emphasized the importance of the right to vote, not only as it relates to the system of democracy which it underpins, but also as an expression of the dignity of the individual. So if you strip somebody of the right to vote simply because they have gone to be in a pasture, this judgment is telling me that we are seeking not just to deny them the democratic right of participation, but to strip them of their dignity as a citizen. He says the South African Constitutional Court has made the point that the vote of each and every citizen is a badge of dignity and of personhood. Quite literally, it says that everybody counts. And the 300 that were removed from the voters list were resident overseas in the United States, Canada, and elsewhere. And they were taken off the list without due process. In applying the law, the provisions of the Act governing the exercise of the right to vote may be said to have a constitutional pedigree. In applying the law, and I would suggest in interpreting the law and the regulations, preference must be given to the recognition of the right to vote, and the legislation must be construed in a manner which promotes enfranchisement and guards against disenfranchisement. The good lady and the good gentleman have heard so much argument aimed at targeting citizens who are living lawfully overseas and doing their best for themselves and for their country. And I'll get to the country part in a very short while. These concepts and principles apply to the states and territories of the Eastern Caribbean no less than they do in Canada and South Africa. Part of the discussion about the right to vote is this arbitrary limitation of the 5-year limit. And we see currently in the international community from whence we get our international best practices, we see Canada has removed the 5-year rule and given citizens the right to vote, regardless of how long outside of Canada, once they were had some initial residence before their departure. England repealed the 15-year rule to give citizens the right to vote wherever they may be in the universe, not in virtual constituencies, but in the physical universe. Australia as well. If my memory corrects me, and the justice from Kenya can correct me, Kenyans have the right to register. Kenyan citizens living out of Kenya have the right to be registered to vote. And there was a regulation in Kenya that required registration simply on the basis of a passport. And the matter went to the Supreme Court of Kenya. And the Kenyan Supreme Court issued an order that Kenyans who have alternative forms of identification issued by the Kenyan government should be allowed to be registered. So we also have the critical test of St. Kitts. St. Kitts in 2009 passed a law, ladies and gentlemen, that gave me, if I were Nibishan or Kitishan, the right to register and vote in a constituency in which I resided before I left for however long. And they went one progressive step further than most, that if you were not born in St. Kitts and Nevis, but you were a citizen because of your parent, either one of your parents, you could register in the constituency in which your mother was resident before she died or migrated. Or if she was not a Kittitian citizen, to the constituency in which your father lived at one stage. And there was some disingenuous discussion that the Attorney General, who was the brother of Sir Dennis Byron, made a statement and laid a bill. The legislation, ladies and gentlemen, was never amended. They tried to, but there was an uproar, as there is in Dominica now, that would constitute a deprivation of the rights of our citizens overseas to vote. Now, I have to give a historical context, if I may. In 2005, persons who appeared before you and the current leader of the United Workers' Party made a compelling case for the right of diasporians to vote. They said it would be a matter of great disrespect to deny us, our citizens, our rightful birthrights, as citizens to vote simply because we reside overseas, and especially because of the great contribution we make to the development of our country. The current political leader of the United Workers' Party, Irvin Andre, Gabriel Christian, all of that. In fact, in his book, In Search of Eden, written together with Gabriel Christian, at page 555, Irvin Andre says, all Dominican parties and organizations must commit to giving the diaspora the right to vote, and the Constitution be amended to allow same where necessary. Such voting rights are a prerequisite to respectful recognition of the diaspora's role. It would be an insult to seek the diaspora's economic support while denying the overseas community's rightful place and rightful role, that of equal partner in nation building. Gabriel Christian used even better language, but I won't read it. I hope the observers get a chance to read it, but I will say this. He said, United States citizens, in an article published on May 10, 2015, clarification of the diaspora and voting situation. US citizens are allowed to send in absentee ballots from wherever they may be. No one pillarizes that right. Are United States citizens in superior in civic virtue to born Dominicans? Who would deny an overseas Dominican the right to vote? Yet the Chinese who are selling passports, well, that's really not really relevant. He says, most of us have fought all our lives to develop our country. Our dutiful effort ensures that our departure does not mean an end to our birthright and our responsibility to build Dominica. Therefore, I find it an insult worthy of rebuke to somehow castigate those who went home to vote as an unworthy of their birthright of paid mercenaries. Our contributions benefit all Dominicans. and the medicines and books and infusions of cash into the local economy are not coded in party colors. Our assistance is welcome, yet we must not be allowed a seat at the table of political dispensation. And he says, to speed it up a bit, our resources have staved out, whichever one. You know what I mean? The collapse of our country many a time. And in fact, I'll get to the next story about whether the diasporan vote is in fact a factor. Let me deal with that now, if I may, before I go on to the essence of my support for the rights of diasporans to vote without limit as to time or residence, because that's not the law. In 2005, there was a huge outcry. Scared, bring them people here to vote and win the election. Thompson Fountain, now political leader of the United Workers' Party, wrote an article and called "Why the Diasporan Vote Should Not Be Blamed for the United Workers' Party Defeat," May 10th, 2015. And he has the heading there, Diaspora Factor. There's clearly a lot of misreporting going on concerning the impact and numbers of the overseas vote. In the 2000 elections, where everybody acknowledges this was not the issue, 35,650 people voted. In 2005, there were 2,500 new registrants, pushing the possible total to 38,150. During the elections, 37,401 people voted, yet about the same level voted in the 1995 election, which was won by the United Workers' Party, my insert, before the word diaspora was invented, his excerpt. When you consider that a number of persons who voted in this year did not vote in the last election, it is clear that no more than 300 or 500 persons could have come from overseas. Further, in the light of the election, the same schedule of flights from Puerto Rico, etc., had not been increased. Perhaps the biggest contradiction to the notion of overseas voting, tilting the vote in, is already alluded to concerning the loss of support for even the United Workers' Party winners. No amount of the influx of overseas labor votes can explain why the dramatic turnout for one's invincible candidates. The truth of the matter is these elections saw the defeat of the United Workers' Party, not by the diaspora Dominica, but rather by the people of Dominica living in Dominica, and can be neatly summed up as, inverted commas, the Skerritt factor. In 2019, they said they even pleaded in their case that 8,000 Dominicans came to vote. There were dozens and hundreds of planes, jet skis, boats, yachts, helicopters all over the place. An economist did a study, said it would have taken several weeks for planes fully loaded to land every single day to carry in the 8,000 voters that claimed were flown in by the Dominica Labour Party to vote. The chairman of the Port Authority that's in charge of all of the ports said that there was a marginal increase, 400, maybe say 800, in arrivals for the same period of time, 2019, as occurred in 2018. But the increase could have taken into account persons coming in to vote, the observers. There were 3-4 teams of observers. The international and regional media was there and so on. So there's been a great exaggeration about the influence of the diasporan vote, and I'm quite sure, I haven't listened to every second of the consultation, no objective data of prejudicial effect on the voting has been presented during the consultations. But the more important question, as far as I'm concerned, if it was disrespectful to deny the citizens overseas the right to vote because of their contributions, I want to read from a press release marked "Remittances Reducing Poverty, Promoting Access to Education," in which the wonderful Frances Del Sol was featured. I had the great privilege of listening to her this evening. And this is what it said. I'm not going to be much longer, but it's critical in this last consultation. I settled some of the outstanding matters that have been just way off. She says, in 2004, I headed the Commonwealth of Dominica Ontario Association, the largest Dominican organization in Canada, said Del Sol. Through the efforts and under my leadership, we were able to support farmers after Hurricane Dean, Princess Margaret Hospital through several fundraising galas, and to support Dominica after Tropical Storm Erica and Maria. And Ms. Del Sol, we thank you. I thank you from the bottom of my heart on behalf of the Dominicans for your thing. But here comes the critical part, ladies and gentlemen. World Bank estimates based on IMF data indicate that in 2021, during the COVID crisis, let me interject, a time of great peril and vulnerability of our people in our country, personal remittances received in Dominica peaked at an all-time high of 65 million United States dollars. That's from the Dominicans in overseas that the United Workers' Party are hell-bent on denying the right of participation. In 2015, the year of Tropical Storm Erica, remittances into Dominica also peaked at almost 56 million United States dollars. Similar trends were demonstrated after Hurricane Maria, with remittances of US 86 million received during the recovery period between 2017 and 2018. That is 207 million United States dollars in a country as small as ours. That is over $500 million that our citizens overseas, many of whom are registered, sent remittances back to the country at a time, ladies and gentlemen, when we were as a nation and as a people, the most vulnerable. For the observers who may not know, Erica destroyed 94% of our beloved country. Maria destroyed 224% of our GDP. And the country was in a desperate position, but who came to our assistance? Our brothers and sisters in the diaspora. And I hear what it says. In Dominica, the contribution of remittances is not insignificant. In 2020, remittances received in Dominica were estimated at 10.4% of national GDP, well above the average of 6.9% average in Caribbean small island states, and 2.4% average across Latin America and the Caribbean. Ladies and gentlemen, I am not saying they have the right to vote because of the remittances. They earn the right by the registration. The Constitution says once registered, you have the right to vote. But what I am saying is that the unfortunate choice of demonizing the diaspora to take away the vote flies in the face of the tremendous assistance that they have given us over the years. And they earn the right to remain on the voters list because of their constant connection, substantial connection to the country. My last point is the question of transporting supporters. Ladies and gentlemen, the idea of the right to vote, transporting supporters were matters before the election court in 2005, 2009, 2019, all of which allegations were struck out as being baseless and without substance and without merit, and was struck out at an application to strike out case. And the reason is very clear. They were creating a fiction which did not fit the law. A lot of people have referred, I have 3 short quotations to read from so that the audience and the observers understand what's really at stake. A lot of persons have referred to Halsbury 770, traveling expenses. They all start with, but the payment or promise of payment to a voter for his traveling expenses on the condition expressed or implied that he would vote for a particular candidate is bribery. But they left out the first part of the paragraph. The unconditional payment or promise of payment to a voter for his traveling expenses is not bribery. In fact, when the question of the magistrate's jurisdiction to determine election offenses went to the CCJ, I think the Prime Minister was a party to the proceedings. This is what Justice Anderson, one of the outstanding legal stars on that CCJ, said in paragraph 22. I'm just going to read part. Treating was therefore known as a corrupt electoral practice for over 80 years before its inclusion as a summary offense in the Elections Act. The very definition of treating, and you can put bribery in brackets, in the Act specifically emphasizes the requirement for a corrupt purpose. Under Section 56, it is not the mere payment of expenses or the provision of goods, drink, or entertainment that constitutes treating. And we will say more so in relation to bribery, where you must establish and plead a corrupt arrangement. There must be a corrupt intent to influence the person receiving these favors to exercise his or her franchise in a particular way. In other words, it must be given to them in a manner to induce them, rather than voting for me or for you, to get them to vote for me. There must be a corrupt purpose. This is why when the matter of the strikeout came out after the 2019 elections, Justice Glasgow, whose judgment stands as the existing law, said this in paragraph 146. In addition, I observed that in Dominica, there is no offense against transporting one's supporters.
Senior Counsel,
So we have spent
a little reminder that
about the transportation of
we should try to wrap up.
in the Commonwealth of Dominica, and they tested in 2005, 2019. And the threshold for a viable pleaded case of treating a bribery has not crossed the threshold to be allowed into the arena for the court to determine. Ladies and gentlemen, I just thought I had an obligation to bring these matters to your attention. There's a lot more that I could say, but time is of the essence, and this is the last consultation that we had. So I hope that I've been of some assistance to you.
Okay,
Thank you very much. And CAPSEC and AG, thank you for doing a great job. So to the CAPSEC, all the best.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Senior Counsel, for your contribution. We have a few more speakers lined up. I believe we have Mr. Justin Victor, who is waiting to speak. Jerome Victor is on, and then we have Lloydie, and then Shirley Samuel. Go ahead, Mr. Victor.
Yes, good evening. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, hello.
We can hear you very well. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I've been following the consultation night after night after night after night. And I'm a Dominican from the village of Recaz. And I left Dominica just a few years ago. I worked and lived in Dominica all my life until I was 50 years old. I got registered when I was 18 years old while I was in college. And I have been voting each and every election except the last one that we had just last year. Now, I see the trend that's going on. When Mr. Edison James was in power, he went all over and he asked that Dominicans from all over the world, all over the globe, to come to Dominica to vote for him. I just wonder if at that time he knew that these Dominicans who live overseas was not entitled to vote. I want to know, why is it only now because Mr. Skerritt is doing such a wonderful job in Dominica, and that the people of Dominica who live overseas sees and appreciates all the things that has been done in Dominica, and they don't see a light at the end of their tunnel, and that they're trying to disenfranchise us who live overseas and trying to make a living for ourselves. A lot of them don't understand that most of us who live overseas, we live elsewhere, our heart and our soul and everything that we have within us is back in Dominica. And I don't understand why, again, it's only the Dominican Labour Party that has a leader that lives, works, and advocates for the people who live in Dominica. I want to know why their leader is in South Sudan working and the other one is somewhere in the United States working. And I want to know why. They are the only ones which will be allowed to come back to Dominica and vote. And the supporters of the Dominican Labour Party are not allowed to come back to vote. I want to know why. Now, I have some things that I wrote down, but I was listening to most of the speakers who spoke before me, and they have touched on most of the things. But I want to touch on the voters' ID.
Jerome, can you talk a little bit more? You are very faint. We're not hearing you very clearly.
I'm very faint. Okay, I may have to turn off this headphone. Let me try to turn off this headphone and see if it will go off.
You can go ahead, but just speak up a bit more.
And
Oh, okay.
more into the mic.
No, I want to touch on the voters' ID. Just to vote every 5 years, you want to have a voters' ID card. And we all know that people lose things all the time. You vote in 2025, and then you're gonna wait for 2030 to vote, and you put that card somewhere. Within that 5 years, you're not using that card to do anything, just to vote. In 2030, you may never know where that card is. Now you want to replace that card. Who's gonna pay for it? The government has to spend how much money to make a card just to vote for one time? So my recommendation would be that we have a national ID card, just like they have in Santo Domingo. Santo Domingo has something they call the cellular, and that cellular has a number on it. You can include that number on your passport, or you can include it on your driver's license. In case you lose that identification card when you come to vote, your driver's license has this number on it, and your passport has that number on it. So that should be a unique number. And so if you don't have that card, if you lost that card, you should be able to use your driver's license or your passport or your social security card to vote. Now, another thing, that 5-year rule, just like you hear that lawyer that say he lives in Dominica for 40 years and he still votes in the United States of America. You're talking about best international practice. And a citizen of the United States can stay in Iraq, Iran, Spain, anywhere he is, and this is ballot for him to vote. Why can't we have the same thing? Why can't we vote? So that 5-year rule, I would recommend that 5-year rule be scratched up and let everybody, unless they are dead. So my mother died in 2019. Just before the election, I came down from my mother's funeral. A few months later, my mother died. When I went to vote, I looked for her name on the list and it wasn't there, which means to say the system is working. I saw, on the other hand, my aunt who died probably more than 15 years ago, and I saw her name on the list. And that is because she died in the United States of America, and probably her children didn't send information to Dominica, and that is why her name was still on the list. That doesn't mean that the list is not working, or if you see anybody come to your police station as a dead person voting, I'm telling you, if I see my grandmother come and vote, I will run. And I wonder why the clerks and the how do you call them, the polling clerks and the returning officer and those people, I wonder why when they saw those dead people coming and vote, I don't know why they didn't run away. So these people have to stop using those kind of madness to try to impress the observers and everybody else sitting that dead people are voting. Dead people don't vote in Dominica. Everybody knows everybody. And you cannot come at Grand Bay and come to Vegas and tell somebody, oh, my name is Jerome Victor, and they will allow you to vote. Every single person in the village knows you. So you cannot come at Grand Bay and come Vegas and say you're going to vote on my name. Or you can come out in La Plaine and come to say you come and vote on Agnes Daniel's name. Everybody knows Agnes Daniel. She's dead. You know what I'm saying? So another thing I have jotted down, I think I touched on that already. Why this is okay. I didn't see something else I had written. But like I said, most of the things I have written, a lot of people touched on it already, so I don't want to go back there. They are talking from both sides of their mouth. They're trying to tell diasporas that they cannot vote, yet they have come to Tonkin, their leader, living in Sudan, and when election comes, he can come and register as a candidate so he can vote. 2 elections back, they had this lady, that Anthony Victor lady that lives in Antigua. She's a lawyer in Antigua. She came down and registered as a candidate. And she lives in Antigua for how long? We didn't object to it. But no, because they see they cannot enter in the cabinet, they cannot enter into power. They want to see how they can look for some kind of all kind of cocoa macaque for them to try to see how they can disenfranchise us and how they can get Roosevelt Skerrit out of office. But I will tell them Roosevelt Skerrit is the best, and he will remain the best leader. Even if somebody comes after him, I don't see another leader that can cut Mr. Roosevelt Skerrit. You know what I'm saying? And one election call, he doesn't have to send no ticket for me. One election come next time, I will come down and I want to see who tries to stop me to vote. Okay, people, I know the time is short, and I thank you for allowing me to express my opinion tonight. And I hope the observers and everybody that is involved will make the necessary changes to make sure and to ensure that all of us who live overseas, especially those of us who live overseas and have our houses, like right now, I have a loan to pay in Dominica, my house is in Portsmouth. I have to send, sometimes I send most of my money that I make here, I send it back home to pay for my loan. You tell me when I come back to Dominica that I have no right to come back to Dominica, even if I am a US citizen or whatever, I have a green card or whatever, you want to come and tell me. When I come down to Dominica, I have my property in Dominica, I have my family in Dominica, my father, my brother, my sister, my nephews, my everybody. I maintain whatever I maintain in Dominica. And one time for election to come, you can tell me I can't come down to vote. This is pure madness. And these people they have to fix up themselves and give people the real reason why they don't want us to come. And the real reason why they don't want us to come is because they know that they cannot cut Mr. Skerrit. No matter what they do, they will not be able to cut it. There's none of them that will cut it. Okay, thank you so much, and I'll keep on
Mr. Victor, we appreciate your contribution this evening. I believe we have Lloydie on. I'm assuming it is Lloyd.
Yes, good evening. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you. I think we've been taken over by Benz this evening. Go ahead.
Good evening, Capset. Good evening to the AG. Good evening to the observers. I must say, and to all the people or the diasporans, Dominicans around the world, much have been said. I've been listening and following the consultation, and I want to thank the government of Dominica under the esteemed leadership of Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit for doing this. Because one would imagine if that wasn't done and, you know, the government took this to Parliament and voted on it, whatever laws or adjustments that would be made to the voting electoral system, you would imagine the cry and the screaming that would be resounding in all corners of Roseau and Dominica. But again, the Labour Party, the leader of government, the cabinet, understands the importance of letting every Dominican have a say. That is why we are here, observers. That is why we're here, because all of us, no matter where we are, where we reside, we have a common and solid interest in the country called the Commonwealth of Dominica. And nobody knows it better than the Prime Minister. That's why he allowed this consultation. But what is the intent of all of this? Why are we doing this? It's because we need to be inclusive. We need to be involved. And there we have a group of people that have decided that the diaspora, those of us who live overseas, should not be part of this. And it is not because of lack of remittances or contributions. It is not because of lack of we are not citizens, because we all are citizens of Dominica. It is not because of lack of violating the Constitution, because most of us that vote in Dominica goes to Dominica at least once a year, once every 5 years, as prescribed by the Constitution. So it begs the question, what is it? What is it that you're so upset about? What is it that you want to change? What is it that you want to prevent the diasporans so much from coming home? What is, for one, is in my view and my understanding, is because you feel in your political setup that you don't have the support. But it has been proven, observers, CAPSEC, AG, and everybody else, that even if the diasporas do not come, which is their right to do so based on the Constitution, the party that is against the diasporans coming to vote would not win the election. And I can guarantee you, even if an ID card, a voter's ID card is offered or given after elections are called and they lose the election, they're going to have something else. We Dominicans, we are accustomed with the UWP and the foolish rhetoric. We're accustomed with it. So we are saying, you cannot disenfranchise us. You cannot eliminate us from our country of birth. You cannot take our birthrights and our constitutional rights and just decide to do away with it. This is crazy. This is madness. On the issue of campaign finances, and it was elaborated on, I always call the other side, and I always said that it's hostile hypocrisy, because we know they have raised money for the campaigns. All of a sudden, you want government or you want the country to put a cap, and you also go as far as saying, Lennox Clinton said that $10 million should be given to his party to campaign from the Treasury. Isn't that crazy? They have exhausted their contacts overseas. The promises that was made to the people who contributed are no longer there. It doesn't exist. So folks are looking for a cap out. And usually when guys cannot win, they try to move the goalposts. The referee is the problem. The linesman is the problem. Well, the playing field was too wet or it was too dry. There is always a sorry excuse. And by so doing, they try to make modifications. So we know about campaign financing, and we know that every party that decides to run, they have to find ways and means to raise money. The great United States, Great Britain, all of Europe, that's what they do. All the parties individually raise their money to campaign. St. Martin, Antigua, St. Kitts. But we have a few people in Dominica who decides, or who is deciding, that that is not the way to go. Let us put some kind of stuff to it that it will cap it out. I don't believe that should happen at all. As far as the ID card is concerned, I agree with those that are on the side of having a national ID card. My dear friends, one caller said a while ago, and he's right. There are different layers in terms of securing. I don't want to call it label this of security, but there are different layers that ensures that our election is free and fair. We have had observers that came for the last 2 elections and previous elections and gave elaborate reports about how safe and how good and how calm our election process has been and is and was. My dear friend, they are polling the people that represent every party, as represented every party at the polling station. And if that is not enough, you are asked, I didn't hear anybody elaborate on that, but you are asked to dip your finger in an ink. Observers, that ink lasts for over 48 hours. It doesn't matter what you use. You could use Clorox. You could use all kind of different bleach. It won't come out not before 48 to 72 hours. So there is no way any individual can duplicate a vote except all the agents at the polling station are blind. And that is not the case in Dominica. So that issue where we need ID card and dead people are voting and clean up the list, what difference would it make for the results if dead people cannot vote and their names are on the list? I mean, we can clean it. I have the problem with clean it, but they are not saying that because they want it to be clean. They are looking for an excuse to say that the Labour Party, the government in power, has stole the election. No proof of this. Ask them. They need to be asked. Has anyone filed a case, an injunction against anyone who they saw a dead person, who saw a dead person voting, or who saw anybody duplicating their votes for the past 20, 30, 40, 50 years? Show us. No, you don't have evidence. You don't have nothing. But you would come up and say that dead people voted. My dear friends, we got to understand what is at stake. And I heard a previous caller talk about communism. Are you kidding me? That was a kind of I don't know where that came from, but that back in the days, that was a way of trying to instill fear in people. Oh, the communist is coming for you. This one is coming to take. And I don't believe intelligent people could be using that line today, talking about communism and capitalism and securing democracy. Most big countries have a democratic deficit. We saw it on January 6th in 2001 in the United States. We saw what happened. But I'm not against the United States. Things will happen. So when you come and talk about the Chinese and the big elephant and other things, don't try to instill no fear in anybody. We are living in 2023. We are living in a geopolitical environment. We understand all the systems. We understand what everybody wants, what they're looking forward to. So that's not in back in the days where people couldn't read and write and research. We are better than this. Our country is better than this. My dear friend, we got to continue to show that the diasporans, the Dominicans abroad, whether you were born in Dominica, whether you're a Dominican through marriage, whether you're Dominican through any other means, whether it's through the CBI, whatever it is, a Dominican is a Dominican, and he has the right. Once he meets the Constitution requirement, he has a right to extend and to hold on to his rights, because that is what the law is all about. When the lawmakers, when the people who drafted the Constitution, I see we forget it's not only about the letter of the law, it's also about the spirit of the law. What was their intent? So if you tell me I got to come down for one night or for 90 days, as my good friend from St. Thomas says, what difference? If I'm from Benz. If I go Benz and sleep for 3 months or for whatever amount of time, and I leave or I sleep for one day, what difference does that make? We're talking about here the spirit of the law and not the letter of the Constitution. So we must understand where we are. We must understand what we're doing. In closing, I want to let the observers, tell the observers and all those listening that we are not, if we're going to do a voter's ID, an ID card, it has to be a national ID. If we're going to talk about coming to Dominica, I think the once every 5 years should be totally eliminated, removed, because nobody should decide for me when I should come and exercise my franchise, yes or no. This is what we're fighting for. And Cap said, I must say too, we should not be fighting to take out the names of people from the list who have contributed, who are Dominicans, who have been coming to Dominica once every 5 years. You know who names need to be removed from the list? Those that goes on 60 Minutes and vilify the country and denigrate the country. Those that went to the UN while the Prime Minister was after Hurricane Maria was trying to address the UN and talk about our situation. Those that went out and told the people, the donors, not to give Dominica any assistance. Those are the names that need to be removed because they do not have the country at heart. They are anti the country. I want to say good night and thank you for taking my call.
Thank you very much, Lloyd. I mean, I was just about to say I really would not like to have any rivalry among Ben's people in terms of the amount of time that you all got, but I do appreciate your points and thank you very much for your contribution. I believe we have Shirley Samuel, who is also on. Shirley.
Good night. Good night.
Good night, Shirley. We can hear you very clearly, so go ahead.
Okay, good night. Thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this consultation here. You know, I have listened to the consultations throughout the days that, you know, this has been held, and it hurts really to, the host has asked you to start your video. Okay. Hold on. Okay. Yeah, it really hurts me to hear, you know, some persons, the manner in which they speak about Dominicans living overseas. It pains really. But just ignore that. Because I was born in Dominica, raised in Dominica, schooled in Dominica. I worked as in the teaching profession for 37 years. A teacher, principal, both in primary and secondary school. After I retired, then I moved to the US for family purposes. I have no intention to stay here. My intention is to go back home. I have my farm at home. After Hurricane Maria, I was at home. And I was one of the few farmers who were in the market selling every week for the people, you know, with whatever produce I had. And to hear the remarks that some of my people make towards people like me living in the US, it really pains me. Anyhow, my contribution here is to state that I don't approve or I disagree for any re-registration or any confirmation of any Dominican who are already on the voters list. The reason why we are on the voters list is because we are interested in voting. The only way that our names should be removed is if somebody is dead or if the person requests. If the person writes to say, well, I am not interested in voting in Dominica, remove my name, then that is fine. But for the rest of us who are registered, our names should remain there. So there is nothing about confirmation or re-registration. This is a no, it should just be out. We are already on the list. Let us remain on the list, and when it is election time, we come down as we please to come down to vote, because we come down any other time in any case. So there should be no time limit given. That 5 year, one time 5 years should be removed. And no 90 days, no 50 days, nothing at all. We are Dominicans and our name should remain on the list. No time limit at all. As for the ID cards, I agree for a national ID card, and the only reason why I agree for the national ID card is for the purpose of those who do not have any other identification card, because there may be a few people who may not have a driver's license or social security or passport, or, you know, that's the only reason why I agree for a national ID card. But apart from that, to me, I find it's a waste of resources having to do a card just for voting. It's just a waste of resources. I don't see the need for it. And as for the limitation placed on parties for the amount of money that they should have for raising funds for the campaign, to me, anybody who wants to go up for election, you can raise as much money as you can, to me, for your campaign. This means if you can raise the money as long as it is done in a clean way, it means that when you get into office, you will know, you will have ideas of how to, you know, some ideas of how to develop our island. If you cannot raise funds to have your campaign, then how are you going to manage our island? You know, so I do not agree for any limitation on any politician as to how much money they should have for their campaign. People have different friends overseas and even in Dominica themselves, you know, and if they agree to give money towards campaign, then okay, no problem with this. I do not have any problem in that. As far as the radio station is concerned, I would prefer that DBS radio stay away from this political business, because when I listen to the radio stations, the different radio stations, sometimes I shut some of them up because it's really hurting to hear the kind of ugly remarks that are being made, especially towards our Prime Minister. This Roosevelt Skerrit is doing his best for the island, and I've never seen a Prime Minister done so much as our Prime Minister. God bless you, Prime Minister, and I love you very much. And so I think DBS radio should be neutral, and whichever radio station chooses to broadcast whatever they want to say, then let it be. You know, people have their private businesses, and it should not be thrown down their throats as to whether they should allow, you know, persons to speak on the radio station or not. The only thing I would encourage DBS to do is, if there is an organized debate and they can manage it so that, you know, people will be responsible for saying things. If they say things that are not true, they'll be responsible to pay whatever, you know, costing when people sue or whatever. Then, you know, then they can allow, if there is a debate. Otherwise, it's a no-no. Let DBS stay out of that. What else I have? I think that's about it. So all political parties should raise their own funds. Leave our treasury out of this completely. Okay, so the only time to remove somebody's name on the registration list is if the person is dead, or if the person requests for it. Otherwise, let everybody's names, everyone who have been registered, let them remain on the list. There is no need for cleansing. Cleansing what? If the person is dead, then obviously the name should be removed. And I know the process is being done in Dominica, where when my mom died, when I went to check on her, her name was not there without I saying anything to the electoral office. So I know it is being done. In the US, I do not know how, we get to know in Dominica. But what I'm saying is people who are interested, the Dominicans who are interested, when their families die in the US, they should inform the electoral office. Let them know that, okay, my dad or whoever is dead, and, through, a certified copy of a death certificate, not just saying somebody's dead, there has to be evidence so that their names can be removed. And then that'd be okay. As far as I'm concerned, to me, it's a waste of money, a waste of government funds having to do all those confirmation and re-registration. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. And thank you, Chair, for having me. Thank you, listeners, for listening to me. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Thank you very much, Shirley, and I do want to say thank you very much to your service, for your service as a teacher in the Commonwealth of Dominica. So we do appreciate you.
It's my pleasure. I served with pleasure.
Okay, so let's take the next speaker. I believe we have Dion George. Dion George, are you on? Can you unmute your mic and go ahead, please? And I'm going to ask the next few speakers to be as brief as you can. It's getting late. I know this is our last night. We'd like to take everyone who would like to speak, but we are also mindful of the time for our listeners as well.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking my call. And I think these consultations are important. Typically, I do not disclose who I am, but I will disclose it tonight because I really want my contribution to be short and poignant. So I have served as a manager for voting and elections and election registration in the United States. I am a PhD in political science, and I have taught 7 universities in the United States. And no, but I'm just giving my little credentials here simply because I want the OAS and I would like the observers to understand the point of view that I'm coming through. So I think Dominica is a beautiful country and I love Dominica. But I will say this, I disagree with the OAS. The elections in Dominica has not been free and has not been fair.
Well, you're not been there. How you can disagree then?
Okay, so let me just tell you why I say that. Well, first of all, the OAS says it was free but not fair, and we understand, equal time on the radio and the finances, etc. But I want to concentrate on the free part. So tonight is just 3 points I have, very short. So the first point is this: it was not free. Because free doesn't mean in the United States during the Jim Crow era, where persons had to pay to vote. It was called a poll tax. These are called barriers to voting. Free, in the essence of what it means, also means you cannot influence someone to vote for you. And that's what it really means. And so if you were to bring a ban, or when I say banned, let me finish, man. If you were to, and you see, this consultation needs to be receptive. It hasn't got to be where when someone disagrees that there's a rebuttal, right? So, and now, let me just say one thing too. This is for Dominica. We want to fix the election reform. So free doesn't mean that you have to pay a tax to vote, like in the United States, back in the Jim Crow era, where there was a poll tax. Free also means the other side. That is, you are not enticing me to vote. The Halsbury law of England calls it treating. So if you were to say that you're going to pay my passage to come and vote, or you're going to give a concert and said that the concert is free, it's not free. You're enticing me to vote. That's number one. Number two, the area of residency. I think Dominica Constitution, for what it's worth, I think it has said very clearly what it means. that you have to live in a place, and if you live there for X amount of time, that you're a resident. In other words, if you're dating someone from another constituency and you were to travel there, you cannot vote there. You're not part of that constituency. You must vote what is called your domicile. Please let me finish. That's number one. For example, I have lived in the United States. I have taught 7 universities. I have a PhD in political science. I have managed elections in the United States. And I'm telling you, in the state of Georgia, when we come to residency, there is a certain definition for what is residency. And residency means, in the state of Georgia, and I look at that before I call tonight, it means you have to stay there for 183 days. I don't know what that means in months. I can do the calculation. But it means that you have to have a certain amount of time there. And I want the observers of the OAS to hear and listen well. In the US, you must spend some time to become a resident of a state. So when the callers call and they say that, yes, they contribute to Dominica, I think the Dominican public is thankful by the grace of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. They are thankful. But not because you haven't got to be reproachful. You haven't got to say, okay, because I do that in Dominica, I have a right to vote. No, there are laws. That's why America is not just a free will constitutional republic. So there are laws. And so I'm saying, and my recommendation, I'm not just saying negative things, you know. I want to be positive because this is for Dominica. This is not about UWP or Labour or freedom. This is about the electoral laws of Dominica. So in Georgia, it says you have to have 183 days. I'm saying in this process, we should give a definition for what residency means. And in my fair opinion, I've been in the United States for 32 years. I do not believe if I can come down Dominica for 2 days and vote, that's fair to the people of Dominica. Even if I own a house in the village of Salisbury, even if I can buy a house in the village of Meru, I am saying that if I live in the comfort of Atlanta, if air conditioned, that if I come for 2 days in Dominica, that I should not be able to vote and go back and leave the people in Dominica under government. My only point is solely humble, that let the people of Dominica choose their own government. That's my second point. My third point, which is the last one, I won't stay long, but I want the observers to hear me very clear. The idea of voters voting from overseas. Of course, the US does it. You can be in space. When I say space, I mean outside of Earth. And you can send a ballot, you know, if you can, via internet. But that's the law. My thing is, I don't want to refer to anybody personally, but the Attorney General is saying that people can pay persons to come and vote or buy a ticket for them. That's not true. That's not what the Halsbury law of England and Wales, which is the most comprehensive law that they have. They don't have a single constitution like the United States, you know. What they have is they have several articles, and it come together, and so they come to that. And then it says that, yes, within the district, you can transport people, but not by sea and air. And so I've heard certain persons says, it's okay to do it. No, you cannot pay somebody. It's called treating. You're treating the person. And so obviously they'll vote for you. And I want the OAS to hear that. And I want them to listen carefully. It's not fair that one incumbent government can pay someone passage to vote for them. I have one more point. Please allow me to. Section 56 11 of the Constitution of the of Dominica, it says very clear, very, very clear. And if you may just allow me, I think I have it there on my computer, I'm the correcting papers. But I think it says in the exercise of the Constitution, a commission shall not be subject to the direction or control of any person or authority. And I will repeat it. It's section 56, section 11. That's the Constitution of Dominica. And I mentioned that simply to say that the whole idea of having this, how you call it? Dennis Byron. I don't want to call his name because I respect him. I respect his office and I respect what he has done for Dominica. However, I just read the Constitution there for you. I tell you section, the Constitution of Dominica, 56:11. It says nobody should influence the Electoral Commission. And believe me, if this is a consultation and it's supposed to be something of meaning, I would say this. I believe the founders of the Constitution meant that not the incumbent and not the opposition and not anybody should influence elections in this country. It should be free. And that's why the Electoral Commission should be an independent body. That's my view. I speak with humility. I speak with love for my country. Whether it's the Labour Party that wins, whether it's any party that wins, I would like it to be free and fair. And on my last note before I leave, I would say, I want to thank the observers for coming. I want to thank them for looking at what we have done. But clearly, there needs some help in Dominica. And the CCJ, the Caribbean Court of Justice, did say that Dominica should not have any elections without these things have been straightened out. So, I mean, if someone were to say that they build a house in Dominica, I've listened to the program tonight. I'm here correcting papers. But if someone were to say, oh, I build a house in Dominica, so someone is disenfranchising me from, that's stupidness. So you tell me if I go and buy a house in Russia, that means I can go and vote in Russia? That's wrong. Russia will tell me, get out. You have to define, and this is a recommendation, you have to define what is residency. I tell you, in the state of Georgia, you have to stay 183 days in the state to be a resident. So you cannot stay overseas for 4 years or 5 and then come to Dominica and says that I should be able to vote because I build a house in Dominica. That is just, because hush rush, they call it. That's stupidness. But my last point, and then I'll say thank you for hearing me out. Honestly, thank you, and may the grace of Christ, Jesus Christ, bless this country of Dominica.
Thank you very much, George, the unjudged, Dr. George.
Yeah, but I have one last one.
You had 2 last points, Dr. George.
No, one last. I'm serious.
Last.
These things happen when countries are young. That's number one. When countries are young. So that means we do not have the rules in our constitution that would frame what should happen. It also happens when laws are vague. So what we're doing right now, I want to, and by the way, I'm not giving you what in Patois we call NIPWI, I'm not doing that. I am saying what I know, and if what I learned was wrong, then I'm wrong. But these things happen when there are not straight laws and framework to make things happen right. What we need, and what we're doing now, is a very interesting exercise, and it should be taken in the right manner. We need to create laws that says exactly who can vote, and I do not believe that someone can live in the US and come Dominica, vote and go back. I think that's wrong. That's just my opinion. And perhaps the observers can hear me and make a judgment. And what I would like to leave tonight with the observers is that voting to be free and fair is not just paying a poll tax. But if you were to influence someone to vote, it's not free. That you're enticing them. It's called treating, I will say, as a political scientist, and I really do mean it. So thank you for your time. May God bless you, and may God bless Dominica.
Dr. George, for your contributions. We are coming down to the end. I think we probably have only about two more speakers. I believe Mr. Darius Liquens is on. Like I said, it's getting late, so Liquens, I'm going to give you a few minutes, but I would ask that to be very brief this evening because we know that you've already shared with us at previous consultations. But go ahead.
Diaspora in Dominica.
Diaspora in Dominica. Go ahead, Dr. Liquens. Dr. Liquens, your mic is.
Hello.
Go tell us about the
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can hear you, Dr. Liquens.
Yes. There are a couple of things I didn't hear. I don't think there's something we shouldn't argue about because people have different views. But if we want to talk about overseas voting, and we do that in case of modernization, then I think we should think of the other things that are done in the US. In the US, you are allowed to vote early. Voting is not restricted to one day. There are thousands of Dominicans who do not vote every election. Some of them probably because they don't want to come and stand in line for hours. So if we're talking about expanding the voting privilege, then maybe we can think about allowing early voting in Dominica so that people can come in the evening and within half an hour be done. Having said that, there are a couple of things that I want to correct that was said. Someone objected when someone said, you can't, if you live in Grand Bay and you have a house in Portsmouth, you can't vote in Portsmouth. And I said, that's not true. And I hope that someone would correct that. The fact that some people do it doesn't mean it is allowed. The law doesn't allow for it. In fact, under our laws, we are allowed to transfer or required to transfer our registration if we move to another jurisdiction. So that means the law does not allow you to register in Portsmouth, go and live in Grand Bay, and come back and vote in Portsmouth, because you should transfer your registration to Grand Bay. Now, on that point, the Attorney General said either last night or night before, probably last night, that we have been operating under the same laws since 1978. That is true, but in fact, the laws go back to 1951. And in terms of, because the House of Assembly Elections Act was enacted in 1951. And what it did was, it made sure that the voting process was easily available to everyone. That's why our polling districts are small enough so that the polling station is within walking distance of every registered resident in the district. And that is because the law did not expect to put a cost on the voter to vote. So you can walk to the polling station and go back home. That means that I can give you a ride to it because, and this follows on what the last speaker said, the idea of giving people a ride across districts is not envisioned by the law. And in fact, to illustrate that, in 1970, that whole issue came up, because I think a lot of the Dominicans forget that our election laws were both in position before we got independence. The Elections Act was passed in 1951, and the Registration Act was passed in 1974. We got independence in 1978. In 1970, Mr. Edward Oliver de Blas established what I think it was the pattern for all government to follow. He was the premier, and his government was from the Dominican Labour Party. And at that time, most Dominicans, some Dominicans remember that there was a coup planned against him. He fired 3 ministers and he called elections. He had 3 months to organize a new party, organize a campaign, and make sure that he won, and all doing that with a new party name and a new party symbol, because when he fired his ministers, they did not allow him to use the Labour Party name. They took him to court. He said, okay, you want to hold the name of the Dominican Labour Party? He formed the Labour Party. But he realized that he had to get the vote out if he was going to win, because he no longer had name recognition, because his party was new, the symbol was new. He didn't want to violate the 1951 Act. And that was the first time I even learned about those restrictions on treating and bribery and influence. And Mr. LeBlanc, with wisdom, sought legal advice from the Attorney General, who informed them to take note of what the law requires, of what the law allows. We have these polling stations that are within walking distance, so that the only people who would need transportation are people who are either elderly or disabled. Healthy people wouldn't need transportation to a voting station, so that the question of transporting voters even across constituency lines is frowned upon by the standard that Mr. LeBlanc took in 1970. Mr. LeBlanc definitely, based on the interpretation that his Attorney General gave him in 1970, understood that you only transport people within your district, because their district is within walking distance at the polling station. And so you aren't in any way paying them anything, because the voting process does not require the payment of money. So if we're going to modernize, then we should think about early voting, and then we are talking about organizing, about modernizing. But the matter of bringing people, of paying for people's transportation to come across from one country to the next, that should be made illegal. You can transport an elderly person within their polling station. That is what the law allows, because that's why the law made the polling districts small enough. But if you're going to transport people from one country to the next, you're obviously violating the law and violating the standard that of the father of our nation, Edward Oliver Party, established. Thank you very much.
You were short as you promised. I appreciate that, and thank you for your contribution. I believe we have one more person, Ambrose Thomas, who would like to speak, to contribute. Ambrose?
Thank you so much for taking my call. I appreciate it. Good evening, Madam Capsec. Good evening, the AG. Good evening, distinguished observers, and good evening to all my Dominican brothers and sisters at home and abroad. I think I just got to remind the two previous callers that the UWP government was the government that started that type of treating. So if you guys want to just blame one particular government, like the incumbent government, for doing that, you're sadly mistaken, because it was the UWP. Everything that they are objecting to is everything that they have already participated in. All right. I want to vehemently oppose the suggestions of the removal of the diaspora's elections from the voters list. But before I go to it, I might just take some privileges. A previous caller mentioned that the US does not allow dual citizenship. That is totally wrong. The US does allow allow dual citizenship. If you're a natural citizen, you don't have to give up your citizenship from your country of origin. The US immigration law does not prohibit dual nationality. The Supreme Court also ruled that people can have and exercise rights of nationality in two countries. However, your country of origin may or may not allow dual citizenship. And as far as I know, the Commonwealth of Dominica does allow dual citizenship. All right. History is us. What we say and what we do and what we recommend to the observers, that basically is going to be recorded in history for perpetuity. Now, the responses from those who want to disenfranchise those, or people like me who oppose an absentee time from Dominica, is totally cloaked in hypocrisy. And I know that the observers, they've been hearing about this infamous email from senior counsel. And I'm just reminded about that constant recycling of that famous email. I considered senior counsel as a crusader of diasporans' rights, a champion for rights for Dominicans, not just the diasporans or, it's just all about Dominica, all right? And during the consultation in Marigot, and previously, there were several presenters who, basically referenced that email to the point that they said that every child should know that email by heart. At that presentation in Marigot, we heard presentations from the Charles family in particular, that the genesis of the electoral reform, the reason why we're here, was birthed with Mr. Richard Charles. Both Mr. Charles and his son made mention of that in the presentation. And it is in this vein that I would like to endorse an article recently written by Mr. Dr. Jared Jaja, where he so brilliantly summarizes the genesis of this, our present electoral modernization that we're participating in, which is tonight being the final night. All right. So basically, that email from senior counsel basically was not what the UWPP were constantly just reading and not giving you the full context of that email. If you read it, and if you guys have the privilege of getting that email and read it in its entirety, you would see that the concern of senior counsel was not about re-registering, and voters' ID card, but allowing the electors, the commissioners of the electoral office to fall victim of the shenanigans of the UWP. That was his concern. Not about issuing of voters' ID cards and about re-registration. It's that the commissioners should not fall victim to the shenanigans. Because in that same letter, as it says, that if they did, then the UWP party would turn around and say, hey, look at this. They fell for our shenanigans. And that is why we are here. That is why we are here today, Mr. Observers. All right. I'm just trying to read it. Give me 1 second, and I'm trying to just lost my train of thought. So we've heard of all the concerns of the labor of the UWP and the concerns about the electoral reform, electoral modernization. And again, I'm quoting from Dr. Jaja. I didn't come up with that, but it's in line with my thinking. He says that when we talk about the concerns, one of the issues they looked at, they said that the Labour Party has too much money. The solution, campaign finance reform. Concern that too many diasporans vote Labour. Solution, establish structure that will ban them from voting. Concern about the composition of the Electoral Commission, which favors Prime Minister Skerrit. Solution, increase the number and diversity. Concern that the Labour Party has an advantage with the media. Solution, unfettered access to all medias and free unfettered access to the state. So all the shenanigans has been trumped up by the UWP as a political strategy. So all through the consultation, you've heard all the different points of view, Madam Observers and Mr. Observers. And I can only ask you guys that in all your deliberation, that you guys just, in all good conscience, just review all the contributions made by concerned citizens like myself and others in the diaspora when you're making your deliberation. And I will end quickly because I know it's time short. But to end, I will say it's ironic that the party that squawks at the diaspora Dominicans coming down to vote have been collecting financial donations and contributions from the diasporas from all over the world. There's no record of how much has been collected over the years or how the monies have been spent towards electoral campaigns. If they push to disenfranchise diasporans from voting, then they should not be allowed to receive funds from the diasporas. At the end of the day, Dominica should be able to contribute to the party of their choice, and diasporans should be able to vote. I'll end it. Thank you so much for the time. I appreciate the ability to participate this evening. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambrose, for sharing the last word with us. It's getting pretty late. It's already 10:37 on our side. I know some of you are listening from all various parts of the world, and it's morning and probably various times, including Justice Masaga, who is all the way in Kenya with us and has been up at other hours. I'm going to have allow the AG to wrap up and make a few closing comments, and then we will close up. Thank you very much, everyone, for your contributions.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just very quickly, amongst the last two or three speakers, there are a couple of points that need to be addressed, and I'll just go through them quickly because, as has been said, it's late. The issue of traveling expenses. Maybe I should preface what I'm saying. I think I've said it before, but just to repeat. There's a difference between what we would like to be the law or what we think the law should be or what changes we would like to bring in and what the law is. And those who present themselves as experts, whether because of their academic credentials or how many buildings that they teach to, they should actually stick with what the law actually is, because it's an exercise in consultation. And yes, it's true, everybody must be allowed to express their opinion and their view. But if you put yourself forward and use your academic credentials as to boost what you say, then you need to say what is accurate, what is correct. Paragraph 770, which has been mentioned several times during this whole consultation period, the various weeks, of Halsbury's laws of England that was referred to by one of the speakers a moment ago. The fourth edition, volume 15, under the section dealing with election campaigns, paragraph 770, heading traveling expenses. It says, and I didn't say it, it's Halsbury saying it, the unconditional, double underline that, payment or promise of payment to a voter of his traveling expenses is not bribery. Is not bribery. But the payment or promise of payment to a voter of his traveling expenses on condition, that's the alternative, express or implied, that he would vote for a particular candidate is bribery. So people keep talking about a definition. The definition is very clear. If you pay traveling expenses for somebody on condition that they vote in a particular manner, then and it's unconditional, then of course that is bribery. So to just simply say you don't like the idea of somebody paying somebody's traveling expenses is not sufficient. And I said so early on, these cases go way back. So I heard the penultimate speaker with his own thesis, which he has not provided any evidence for, claiming that Mr. Libla, the former premier, who is long deceased and unable to speak for himself, that somehow that is justification for issues in respect to traveling. We should not do that. The fact is, the law as it stands at the moment is quite clear. The unconditional payment or promise of payment is not bribery. If we want to change the law, then that's a different matter. Of course, that can be done, and that may be the argument that people should be advancing if they feel, don't say what the law is, what it is not. Similarly, in relation to treating, it's also Halsbury's paragraph 781 under the heading treating states that, as has been said several times, there needs to be a corrupt intent. A person is guilty of treating if the event is corrupt, a corrupt practice. It goes on, any person who corruptly, by himself or by any other person, directly or indirectly, gives, provides, etc., drink, meat, entertainment, or provision for any person, for the purpose of corruptly influencing that person. And when you look at all of the cases and the detail, it's very clear that you have to have a corrupt intention. Otherwise, merely giving somebody a drink or a meal or some other pleasantry could find itself afoul of that. So I think it's necessary to say that in relation to two of the last three speakers who presented themselves with credentials and didn't actually stick to the facts, but was really saying what the law is. In respect to the issue of Section 56 of the Constitution and the exercise of the functions of the Commission without being subject to any direction or control of any person or authority, that has always been the case, and I'm not sure the point it keeps getting said, as if somehow the Commission can do whatever it wants. Well, I would like to see the Commission draft its legislation and take it to Parliament without following the proper routes. The Commission has its function. The function of the Commission is set out as Section 38 of the Constitution, which I've read before a number of times, but I think I'll read it again just to make it clear. Section 38(1), the Electoral Commission shall be responsible for the registration of voters for the purpose of electing representatives. That's one. And two, for the conduct of elections of representatives and senators. That is those two things are the primary functions of the Commission. And then it goes on, and shall have such powers and other functions relating to such registration and elections as may be prescribed by law. So in the absence of anything being prescribed beyond that, those are the functions of the Commission. Responsibility for registration and responsibility for the conduct of elections. They're not responsible for determining the basis and other factors. That's elsewhere. And yes, in doing those things that the Constitution provides they can do, they are not subject to the direction of anybody else. But just for understanding what that actually means, 5611 that was referred to by one of the speakers a few moments ago. Section 40 of the Constitution, at subsection 8, dealing with the Attorney General. In the exercise of his functions under this section, the Attorney General shall not be subject to the direction or control of any other person or authority. That doesn't mean the Attorney General can do whatever he wants. He still has to follow certain rules, certain regulations. So there's nothing specific, unique about Section 5611 in respect to the Electoral Commission. I think that is what I really want to say. I just think it's important that in concluding on these consultations, the people who have expressed the views, and the last two speakers that I responded to, these are views they've held, and they and I have had these conversations, debates in the past. I respect everybody's right to have their own views, but I think when it comes to the law, if we're saying what the law is, we must stick to what the law is saying, read it from the law book or the authority you're relying on. Stick to what the law is. If you're giving your opinion on what you think the law is, then you should give it as your opinion. But don't give the law or what you say is the law when that is not actually what is in the authoritative text. So I really think that that is important. I think I would like to take the opportunity of wishing everybody safe travel, those who are traveling, and to thank everybody who has participated. I think the chair will allow me to do that. I have had a long stint. It's been interesting to hear the different views. I think that all of us who are involved in this exercise have a lot to chew on, and I'm sure that we will do the best we can, and hopefully we will succeed in having some modernization or reform as a result of this exercise. Good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, AG, for these closing comments. I would like to take this opportunity to really thank everyone for being here tonight. We thank you for your feedback, your opinions, and your comments. We embarked on this consultative process because the government wanted to hear directly from you, the voters, from you in every walk of life in Dominica, every sector, every sphere, in Dominica and outside of Dominica. And I believe we have achieved this over the last 3 weeks. I have also realized, as I have said before, from the feedback we have been receiving from those who are not here in person, that this consultation has been an opportunity for education of the masses on the electoral process and our current electoral laws in Dominica, in addition to what has been proposed by Sir Dennis Byron. I believe that our populace has been very well engaged in this conversation, and I say it is a conversation that we've been having across the island with all Dominicans. And a number of you have shared your views and shared your opinions with us. We have tried to ensure that we can provide as much time as possible to individuals who would like to contribute. However, the opportunity is still there for those of you who would like to share even more, because I know given the opportunity, some of you could have spent more than 30 minutes discussing with us what your views are. But I would encourage you to send your comments in writing to cabsec@dominica.gov.dm. A few of you have been reaching out to our office already to ask for printed copies of the report, and some of you have also been sending in your comments. I must say that we have taken great care to ensure that all the proceedings of the consultations have been transcribed and recorded, and will further inform the final steps of the process by which we conclude these recommendations on electoral reform. The Honorable Prime Minister has already indicated government's intention in terms of how we'll proceed, and I'm sure at a later date, at the end of these consultations, you will receive a further update on the next steps. We have also tried our best to ensure that everyone, as the AG said, everyone who wanted to share their views had the opportunity to do so in a free and fair manner. And I believe all views were able to contend. Some were a bit more interesting and passionate than others, but everybody was able to contribute, and I'm very proud of what we were able to do and what we were able to accomplish in bringing everyone together in this conversation. At this point, I would like to thank the observers, first of all, who have remained with us through these consultations. They spent 2 weeks with us in Dominica. I'm sure it was 2 lovely weeks on the island of Dominica. In addition to being part of these consultations, I do hope that you were able to enjoy the beauty that our island had to offer. And we do appreciate that you have continued with us over the week since you've left Dominica in a virtual format. But we thank you very much, and we look forward to your comments and your observations on this process that we have gone through, and also on the actual recommendations from Sir Dennis Byron. Since this is the final evening of our consultations, I would like to take this opportunity to thank those of you who have accepted our invitation to join us in person, starting at the State House and at the various community consultations. And it has been a pleasure conversing with you on matters of national importance, and more specifically on this matter of the electoral process. I would like to start with the Attorney General, who just summed up for us, Honorable Levi Peter, who has for the last 3 weeks been here with us every night, making these presentations on the Sir Dennis Byron report, and really educating us as well on various aspects of the electoral process, of our electoral laws, what is proposed and what we currently have on our books. I'm pretty sure that in addition to sharing our views and commenting with each other, that a lot of us have learned a lot more about the electoral process from these consultations. I also want to thank Ambassador Francine Barron, who started off as our host for the first week of consultations, and for her engagement with the various groups and organizations that we engaged at the State House. I have to say that we have had a very dedicated team of public officers who have been organizing these consultations and working with us behind the scenes. I would like to first of all thank Mrs. Missy Henderson, the PS in the Office of the Prime Minister, who has been assisting with coordination of these events and who has been my co-pilot for all of these events. And I want to highlight the efforts of the staff of the Office of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet Secretariat, my right and left hands, Ms. Rona Riley and Ms. Annika Roye, for their expert coordination of all the logistics for the last 3 weeks, and the rest of the support staff, our drivers. I'm going to call names because they've done so much incredible work over this week, and I hope I don't leave out anyone, but O'Neill and Pond and Marina, we do appreciate all of your efforts, the police officers who have been assisting us throughout this time. Very especially, I would like to highlight Mr. Chad George and Daryl Teet. If we had people in the room, I'm sure they'll be clapping, but a few of us who are here could clap, for them. And the rest of the GIS camera crew, Albert Tuse, Ashton Shillingford, Anthony Richards, Nigel Hippolyte, and Ishmael Luis. And they've all been with us all around the country, that we've been moving around on these consultations. And of course, Mrs. Dion Dura, the press secretary, for organizing so efficiently with the media as always. I have been successful in pulling out Mrs. Anna Dyer from her pre-retirement leave. She does not want me to call her name, but we do appreciate her, and you have probably seen her on video transcribing, and she's our very expert stenographer, but I do have to tell you that she was on vacation and she has been back with us for the last 3 weeks, also driving across the island to capture your views. I know it's been difficult for her at some of the consultations, and she's writing, she's transcribing everything I'm saying now as well. But thank you very much to Mrs. Dyer and to the entire team. There's so many people who have assisted with this. I do want to acknowledge, of course, the leadership of the Honorable Prime Minister, Roosevelt Skerrit, even in getting these consultations going. And, of course, all of the members of Cabinet who have also been with us and followed all of these consultations, attended the consultations in person, as well to listen to you and to hear your views and your opinions on this report. I want to thank as well all of the other officers, all of the public officers who have supported this process, who may have not been here but have been working behind the scenes. I usually don't like to call names because I don't want to leave out people, but I really felt it was important for us to highlight the work because it's quite a mammoth task. As the Prime Minister said last night, you see us here in the evening at 11 o'clock in the night, but we've already had a full shift from morning with our regular duties, and all of us are continuing this in the evening. But it's very important work, very significant, very transformative for what we are trying to do in Dominica. And I think this is a very good model for how we should, proceed with consultations in Dominica. I also want to thank those of you who have been reaching out to us, reminding us to get some rest and to eat and to sleep and all of the things that we need to do to get going. But thank you very much to everyone. Thank you to all Dominicans for listening. We thank the radio stations who have been carrying these broadcasts live, Carry FM, DBS Radio, and Q95. Of course, we have Honorable Kenneth Daru, who is the Special Envoy with responsibility for electoral modernization, who as well has been with the team every evening on these consultations and assisting with the coordination of these events. But thank you to all of you in Dominica, and we do hope that you have a good night. Be safe to everyone, and good night to observers as well. I'm pretty sure we'll be in touch with you soon. Thank you again.